Yo, welcome to Omni Wizard. Got an absolute banger for you today. What if Harry Potter inherited the Sorcerer Supreme's powers and surpassed Dumbledore? Like, subscribe, comment below, let's go. Chapter 1, The Inheritance. The train had been moving for 20 minutes before Harry noticed he was dying. Not literally, or at least not in any way he could put a name to. There was no pain, no blood, no dramatic collapse onto the sticky vinyl seat of the Hogwarts Express. It was quieter than that. Something was happening to him, somewhere behind his ribs and beneath his thoughts, like a fire being lit in a room he hadn't known existed. He pressed his palm flat against the window and watched the English countryside blur past, green fields, gray sky, a motorway bridge that vanished almost as soon as it appeared, and tried to convince himself it was just nerves. He'd been trying to convince himself of things all summer. The compartment was empty. He'd picked it deliberately, sliding the door shut behind him and wedging his trunk into the overhead rack with the kind of practiced invisibility he'd spent 10 years perfecting in the Dursley household. Don't take up space. Don't make noise. Don't give anyone a reason to look at you. Old habits. He'd sat down by the window with his knees pulled up and his chin resting on them, watching platform 9 3/4 dissolve into the ordinary world, and he'd felt something he wasn't quite ready to call excitement. And then the sensation had started. It was warmth first, then something like pressure, not uncomfortable but present in a way that his own heartbeat usually wasn't. He could feel the edges of himself more clearly than he ever had, like someone had drawn a sharp line around the outline of Harry Potter and filled it in with something new. He pressed his fingers to his sternum and found nothing wrong there. Breathed in, breathed out. The warmth stayed. He nearly said something aloud to whom he had no idea, and then the door slid open and a round-faced boy peered in with the expression of someone who had already been told no twice today. "Sorry, everywhere else is full. Can I sit here?" Harry blinked. "Yeah, go on." The boy hauled himself inside with a frog clutch to his chest, nearly dropped it, caught it, and spent a full 30 seconds getting himself settled before he looked up and seemed to properly register that he was sitting across from a stranger. "I'm Neville," he said. "Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter." Neville's eyes went very wide and then he made a visible, admirable effort to behave normally about it. "Oh," he said. "Right, brilliant." He then looked intensely at his frog. Harry almost smiled. He liked Neville immediately, the same way he'd liked Hagrid. There was something honest about people whose feelings moved right across their faces without asking permission. "Is that Trevor?" Neville's head snapped up. "How did you? I mean, yes, he keeps escaping. He doesn't like enclosed spaces." "Who does?" Harry said, which was not really a response that made sense, but Neville nodded like it was the wisest thing he'd heard all day. They sat in companionable near silence for a while, which Harry found comfortable and Neville seemed to find slightly anxious, because he kept glancing at the door and squeezing Trevor with one hand. Harry watched the window. The warmth in his chest had settled into something steadier, less like ignition, more like embers. He found that if he relaxed into it, stopped pushing at it with the analytical part of his brain, it didn't feel frightening at all. It felt like coming inside after being cold. Which made very little sense, so he stopped thinking about it. The door slid open again, and this time two people came in together. A girl with a very large amount of hair and a boy with a gap where his front tooth should have been, who dropped into the seat beside Neville and immediately said, "Wanna see something mad?" "I can do this thing with my ear, Ron," said the girl, with the tone of someone who had been saying that exact word in that exact tone for some time. She sat down beside Harry, balanced a very large book on her knee, and looked at him with eyes that missed nothing. "Are you Harry Potter?" "Last I checked. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read quite a lot about you." She said it matter-of-factly, no embarrassment, as though it were a perfectly normal opening. Harry found he didn't mind that either. "You should know that the accounts are inconsistent. Some sources say you deflected the killing curse through accidental magic, but others suggest there was a protective enchantment at work. Dumbledore's never fully explained it." "Hermione," said the gap-toothed boy Ron with mild desperation. "I'm only saying it's interesting." She turned a page without breaking eye contact with Harry. "I've also read the standard book of spells through twice and memorized the theory behind most of the first-year curriculum, so if you need help, I'll ask," Harry said, and meant it genuinely enough that she blinked, recalibrated, and seemed to decide she liked him. Ron stuck his hand out across the compartment. "Ron Weasley, sorry about her, she does this." "I do not do anything, I'm simply prepared." "Ron Weasley," Harry said, shaking his hand. "Nice to meet you." And that was that. The four of them, Harry, Ron, Neville, Hermione, settled into the compartment like they'd always been there, which Harry found quietly remarkable. He'd never had friends before, not real ones. Dudley's gang had made sure of that, and even if they hadn't, there was something about being the freakish cousin who made strange things happen that tended to keep people at arm's length. But here, on this train, with the countryside moving past and the smell of a trolley full of sweets drifting under the door, Nobody was keeping anything at arm's length. Ron was telling Neville about the family of gnomes his dad had spent 3 weekends trying to degarden. Hermione was making annotations in the margins of her book with a precise, tiny hand. Neville was eating a chocolate frog with the quiet relief of someone finally allowed to exhale. Harry sat with it all around him and felt with something close to wonder that this was what it was supposed to be like. The sensation in his chest pulsed once, warm and sure. He pressed his knuckles against his sternum and said nothing. It was somewhere past Birmingham, Harry reckoned. The sky had shifted from gray to the particular bruised purple of late afternoon when it stopped being a sensation and became something else entirely. He'd been half listening to Ron explain the rules of Quidditch, half watching the window when he noticed the thread of light. It was faint, barely visible, like catching the glint of a spider's web in morning sun, there for a moment and then gone if you moved your head wrong. But when Harry tilted his chin and let his eyes go slightly unfocused, the way he sometimes did when he was tired, he saw it clearly. A thin filament of something golden running along the ceiling of the compartment, tracing the join between wall and window, looping around the overhead luggage rack and then out through the door and away. Not magic, or not just magic. Something older than that, something structural like the train itself, was threaded through with the stuff. Harry stared at it for a long moment, perfectly still. "You all right?" Ron asked. "Yeah," he blinked and the thread was gone, "just tired." "It's a long journey," Neville offered sympathetically. "Have some chocolate," Hermione said without looking up from her book, and pushed a chocolate frog toward him. It had already made its escape attempt and was sitting defeated on the seat between them. Harry picked it up, bit off a leg, and thought very hard about what he'd just seen. He'd read about the wizarding world obsessively since Hagrid had come to collect him from that windswept rock of a hut. Read everything he could find. He knew the theory of spells, the basics of magical taxonomy, the geography of Diagon Alley. He knew about Hogwarts, the moving staircases, the ghosts, the portraits that talked. He'd been prepared, or so he'd thought, for the world to feel different. He hadn't been prepared for it to be visible, because that was what was happening. Sitting in this compartment with 3 children he'd known for less than 3 hours, eating stolen chocolate frog in his 2 big hand-me-down jeans, Harry Potter was beginning to see the architecture of magic the way other people saw walls and floors. The threads weren't just in the train. When he relaxed that particular way, when he let his eyes do the thing, he could see them in Ron's freckled hands, potential energy, coiled and familial, bred into 6 generations of Weasley blood. He could see the bright, ferocious knot of it around Hermione's head, fierce and hungry and enormous. Neville's was softer, deeper, compressed beneath layers of anxiety that Harry didn't have words for yet but understood instinctively. And then there was what he felt when he turned his attention inward. It was not a thread, it was not a knot or a coil or a filament. It was a fire, vast and quiet and patient, occupying every available space inside him without displacing a single ounce of who he was. It didn't feel foreign. That was the thing that should have frightened him and didn't. It felt like a language he'd been born knowing and simply hadn't been spoken to in yet. He finished the chocolate frog. Ron was still talking about Quidditch. Hermione had moved on to a new book. Neville had fallen into a light doze with Trevor cupped in his hands. Harry leaned back against the window and very carefully reached for the warmth. It came to him instantly, no effort, no resistance, the way water fills a cupped palm. He held it there at the center of his attention and turned it over like a coin in his mind. It was not the magic he felt when he'd accidentally set a boa constrictor on Dudley or when he'd ended up on the school roof to escape a beating. That magic was reactive, emotional, barely conscious. This was something else. This knew things. He had the very clear, very sudden sense that someone had sat with him in this compartment. Not physically, there was no one there, no voice, no hand on his shoulder. But there was a presence, faint and fading like the last heat from a dying coal. It was not frightening. It was exhausted and sad and infinitely careful, and it had the quality of something that had been searching for a very long time. Good, it seemed to say, though it said nothing at all. "You'll do." And then it was gone entirely, and Harry was alone in his own chest with a fire he did not ask for and did not want to give back. He looked at his hands. In the dying light from the window, they looked completely ordinary, bony, slightly too large, with a scar on the right palm from where he'd fallen off Dudley's bike at age 7. Nothing glowed, nothing shimmered. His hands looked like hands. He curled his fingers slowly and felt the fire follow. "Oi," Ron said, "you've gone quiet." "You all right?" Harry looked up. Ron was watching him with uncomplicated concern, the kind that doesn't ask for anything back. Harry thought he might learn to love that about him. "Brilliant," Harry said. "Tell me more about the Seeker." Ron lit up immediately and launched back into his explanation, and Harry listened, and the train moved north, and the fire in his chest burned steadily and said nothing more. Hogwarts arrived like a punch to the gut. Not because it was frightening, though it was, in the way all truly great things are frightening. The way the ocean is frightening when you're standing at the edge of it. It hit Harry in the sternum because the moment the boats rounded the bend in the lake and the castle came into view, blazing with light against the absolute dark of the Scottish sky, every thread of magic he'd been dimly perceiving all evening ignited at once. He could see it all. The castle was not just a building. He understood that in an instant more clearly than any book could have told him. Hogwarts was alive, genuinely, functionally alive, threaded from foundation stone to topmost tower with layer upon layer of enchantment so old and so deep that they had ceased to be spells and become something closer to geology. Protective wards ran through the walls like load-bearing beams. Ambient charms pooled in the valley of the grounds like fog in a hollow. There were enchantments on the lake, the forest, the very soil, and beneath all of it, something older still, something Harry could feel the shape of without being able to see it directly, the way you can feel the mass of a planet even when you're standing on its surface. Hogwarts knew he was here. He was almost certain of it. "You've gone quiet again," Hermione said from the next boat because she'd ended up with Neville and a pair of twins with identical sharp grins, and even across 6 feet of dark water she was monitoring him. "Are you prone to this?" "Sometimes," Harry admitted. "It's a lot to take in," Neville said from beside Hermione with his eyes fixed on the castle in naked, helpless awe. "The first time you see it." "Yeah," Harry said, and then more quietly, "Yeah, it really is." They landed and were herded by McGonagall, crisp, green-robed, carrying an air of brisk authority like a weather pattern through the entrance hall and into a small side chamber. She explained the sorting. She told them what the 4 houses stood for. She said it in the efficient manner of someone who had given this speech many times and considered every second of it professionally important. Harry listened carefully and thought that he liked Professor McGonagall very much. One of the twins, Fred or George, Harry wasn't sure yet, leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry about the troll, it's not really that bad." "There's no troll," Hermione said immediately. "There's a troll," said the other twin. "There's absolutely no," she stopped. "Is there actually a troll?" Both twins smiled identically. Harry decided he liked them as well. The ghosts swept through the wall and caused appropriate commotion, and then they were moving again, through doors that swung open on their own into the Great Hall. This time Harry genuinely stopped walking and had to be nudged forward by Neville. The ceiling was enchanted to show the sky, that much he knew from Hogwarts, a history which Hermione had recommended and he'd actually read. But the enchantment wasn't just visual. Looking at it through his new sight, he could see that it was a window, not a mirror, some structural magic so sophisticated it had effectively peeled back the ceiling and replaced it with a living view, threaded through with preservation charms to stop it being affected by weather or erosion. It had been there for centuries. You could feel the age of it, the settled-in permanence, like a scar that had healed so long ago it had become just part of the body. He looked away from it before he got lost in it. Scan the hall instead. Teachers at the head table, he found Dumbledore immediately, not because of the purple robes or the silver hair, but because the magical signature around him was like looking at the sun with no protection. Harry didn't squint, but he understood the impulse. Dumbledore was vast, magically speaking. A century of accumulated power and knowledge and sheer practiced will, layered on top of a natural gift that Harry suspected had been frankly unsettling when he was young. He was reading the room with half his attention and smiling at something a neighboring professor had said. And for one moment, his eyes drifted across the line of first years and landed on Harry. He paused just for a fraction of a second. His eyes were very blue and very still, and they were seeing something that Harry suspected nobody else at that table could see. Harry looked back at him without flinching. Dumbledore's mouth curved, not quite a smile, something more careful than that, and he returned to his conversation. Interesting, Harry thought. He filed that away. The rest of the head table was easier to look at. Professor Quirrell, defense against the dark arts, jittery and turbaned and reeking of something Harry couldn't name yet. Something deeply wrong. Professor Snape, potions, who was watching Harry with the flat, diagnostic gaze of someone running a calculation. Professor Sprout, round and soul-stained and radiating comfortable warmth. McGonagall, now seated with the composure of someone who has long since stopped needing to prove anything. Then the Sorting Hat. Well, it sang. Harry listened to the words properly, which he suspected not everyone did, and noticed that the song was not just traditional pomp. It contained, if you paid attention, a warning. Though we may seem divided, we are one at our core, a philosophy running under the spectacle. He filed that away too. Names were called. Students walked up, sat down, became Gryffindors or Hufflepuffs or Ravenclaws or Slytherins with varying degrees of relief and disappointment. Hermione went to Gryffindor with barely contained triumph. Neville went to Gryffindor looking like someone who had been given an unexpected reprieve. Potter, Harry, the whole room went quiet. Harry walked up to the stool with his hands loose at his sides and his chin level and his heart doing absolutely nothing dramatic, which surprised him. He sat down. McGonagall placed the hat on his head and it dropped over his ears, and then there was a voice old and dry and accustomed to seeing everything. Well, said the hat in a tone Harry had never heard from anyone, genuine, uncomplicated astonishment. My, Harry waited. I've been doing this for 1,000 years, the hat said with a kind of careful wonder, and I have never once felt anything quite like, what is that? That's not purely wizarding magic, boy. What did you bring into my school? I'm not entirely sure, Harry said in the space behind his eyes where the hat seemed to be speaking. It arrived today. On the train, it arrived, a pause, it chose you mean, another pause much longer. I can see every corner of you, you know, that's rather the point. 11 years of hunger and cleverness and extraordinary restraint, you've been squeezing yourself into a very small box for a very long time. The hat's voice was not unkind. And underneath that, something that most children your age haven't remotely developed, an instinct for the shape of things. A kind of perception. Something strange, Harry thought, without entirely meaning to. Yes, a note of dry humor. Something very strange indeed. Now, the question, the mind says Ravenclaw, you're sharper than you're letting on and you're going to prove it before the year is out. The courage is obvious, anyone with eyes can see it, but there's something else. Something that doesn't fit neatly into any of my 4 categories, and I confess that's rather Gryffindor, Harry said quietly. Not a question, not a demand, just a decision. The hat was silent for a moment. That's not how this typically works, it said, though it sounded more amused than annoyed. I know, Harry said, but I've been thinking about it since McGonagall explained the houses, and I think what I need right now, not what I am, but what I need, is to be somewhere that asks me to be brave before it asks me to be anything else. The longest pause yet. When the hat spoke again, it sounded like something that very rarely changed its estimation of a person had just done so completely. You know, it said, you may be the first student in 112 years to make a genuine argument in this hat. Better be Gryffindor. The last word rang out across the hall and the Gryffindor table erupted, and Harry pulled the hat from his head and handed it to McGonagall, who was watching him with an expression she was working to keep neutral and only half succeeding. He walked to the Gryffindor table and slid into the seat beside Hermione, who said, took longer than average. Was it telling you things? We were talking, Harry said. Hermione's eyebrows went up. Talking? Students don't talk to the hat. It's not a conversation, it's a reading. Apparently we talked. Harry reached for a goblet and poured himself some water. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy was being sorted into Slytherin with a satisfaction that seemed prearranged. Harry watched him without particular interest. I think I made a case. You made a case to the sorting hat, Hermione said flatly. It listened, Harry said. Pass the bread, would you? She passed the bread. She did it with the slightly dazed expression of someone recalibrating what they'd thought the evening was going to look like. Harry appreciated that about her, she didn't waste time on denial. She just recalibrated. Ron arrived a few minutes later, also Gryffindor, practically falling into his seat with relief, and the feast appeared, and for a while there was nothing but food and noise and the specific warmth of a large room full of people who are, on some level, all relieved to be somewhere together. Harry ate and listened and watched the threads of magic pulse gently through everything around him, and thought about the presence he'd felt on the train and said nothing about any of it. Later, much later, after Dumbledore had said his few words, including a rather pointed mention of the third-floor corridor that made Harry immediately want to know what was in the third-floor corridor. After Percy Weasley had led them through moving staircases and shifting corridors and up a portrait-lined staircase to the Fat Lady, Harry stood in the Gryffindor common room and let everyone else filter past him toward the dormitory stairs. The fire was burning in the hearth. Ordinary fire, orange and crackling, but Harry watched it for a moment through his new sight, and saw the ambient magic of the castle cupped around it like hands around a candle, keeping it warm, keeping it steady. Hogwarts looked after its own hearths. He found that oddly moving. The room emptied out. Someone, Hermione probably, called something down the stairs about getting enough sleep for orientation tomorrow, and then there was quiet. Harry sat down on the hearthrug, cross-legged, and held his hands out in front of him, palms up. He concentrated. Not in the effortful, straining way he'd tried to make things happen before. The accidental magic of his childhood had always come from panic or desperation, or the sheer need to not be what the Dursleys wanted him to be. This was different. He reached inward instead of outward, found the fire in his chest, and simply invited it to come to the surface. Light gathered in the center of his right palm. Not much, barely a flicker golden white about the size of a marble. It pulsed once, then steadied, and Harry stared at it with an attention so complete that the entire room dissolved and there was nothing but this, a point of light in his hand, warm and alive, carrying the weight of something he didn't yet have language for. Strange things he knew from this light. Fragments, impressions, not memories exactly, more like the echo of memories. The shape of a cape that moved on its own, the geometry of folding space. The way reality thinned at certain points, like worn cloth, and how someone with the right kind of will could push their hand through. He knew what a sling ring was without knowing that he knew it. He understood in a way that bypassed conscious thought entirely, that magic was not limited to what a wand could do, that wands were training wheels, were scaffolding, were one system among hundreds, and that he had been handed access to something older and stranger and fundamentally different in kind. He also knew with that same instinct-level clarity that he should be very careful about who he told. Not because he was afraid. The fire in his chest did not carry fear. But it carried caution, which was a different and much more intelligent thing. He closed his hands slowly. The light went out. His palm was warm where it had been. He sat in the quiet for another few minutes, listening to the castle settle around him, the creak of ancient stone, the distant murmur of portraits talking to each other down the corridor, the soft hiss of the fire. Hogwarts breathed. He was certain of it now. The castle was not just old magic, it was something approaching sentience, and it knew he was here, and it was reserving judgment. Fair enough, Harry thought. He stood up, rolled his shoulders, and looked around the common room one last time, the warm stone walls, the comfortable clutter of squashy armchairs and bookshelves, the message board covered in Quidditch tryout notices and lost cat flyers. It was nothing like Privet Drive. It was nothing like anywhere he'd ever been. It was the first place he'd stood in that had felt in some indefinable way proportionate, like the space was large enough to contain who he actually was. He headed for the stairs. There was a great deal he didn't know yet. He understood that clearly. He had power he hadn't mapped, instincts he hadn't tested, and a history he hadn't been told. There was something wrong with one of his teachers. There was something behind a locked door on the 3rd floor. There was a man who had killed his parents and wasn't perhaps as gone as everyone seemed to believe. And there was Dumbledore, who had looked at him across the great hall with those still blue eyes and seen something he hadn't expected. Harry reached the bottom of the dormitory stairs, gripped the newel post, and paused. He looked down at his right hand where the light had been. In the dim of the stairwell, ordinary as anything, it looked like just a hand, bony and slightly too large and carrying the old bike fall scar on the palm. He turned it over, studied it. Then he tucked it into his pocket and went to bed. Outside, the Scottish mountains sat in their permanent dark, indifferent to small boys and their inheritances. The lake moved slowly below the castle, deep and cold. The castle itself blazed with its 1,000 enchantments, threaded with ancient care through every stone. And in the space between the ceiling and the enchanted sky above the great hall, something that might have been the last breath of a dying man moved quietly and dissipated content. The Sorcerer Supreme was dead. Long live the Sorcerer Supreme. Chapter 2, the weight of knowing. The first week of classes hit Harry like a particularly disorganized avalanche. Not because the magic was difficult, it wasn't, or at least not in the way he'd expected. The theory behind Wingardium Leviosa was straightforward enough, the wand movements were precise and learnable, and the principles Flitwick explained in his squeaky, enthusiastic way mapped neatly onto things Harry already understood at some level he couldn't quite locate. The difficulty was the opposite problem entirely. Everything was slower than his instincts wanted it to be. He sat in charms on Wednesday morning and made his feather rise on the second attempt, steady and unhurried, and then had to spend the rest of the lesson pretending to refine what was already working, while Hermione on his left made her feather perform precise figure eights, and Ron on his right sent his into a spin that resulted in Flitwick needing to rescue it from the ceiling. Around him, other students were gritting their teeth, muttering incantations under their breath, making feathers twitch or shudder or stubbornly refuse to do anything at all. Harry watched a girl named Parvati coax her 6 inches into the air with shaking concentration and genuine triumph. And he was glad for her. And he was also sitting very still so his own feather didn't accidentally do something that required explaining. Because here was the thing he was learning in real time, one class at a time. He had 2 systems running simultaneously, and they did not always agree on what to do. The first system was standard wizarding magic, wand, incantation technique. He was learning this the same as everyone else, working through the motions, developing the muscle memory. He was good at it naturally, better than average, probably better than he had any right to be for someone who'd had no formal training and a wand for less than 2 months. Flitwick had given him a specific look on the first day that suggested he'd already recalibrated his expectations for Harry Potter. The second system was the fire. The mystic arts inheritance, the strange-shaped thing in his chest that had nothing to do with wands or incantations, and operated on principles that the wizarding world didn't have textbooks for. That system wanted to solve problems immediately, directly, and with considerably more efficiency than Wingardium Leviosa offered. When Harry watched Neville's feather tumble toward the floor, there was a reflex, instantaneous, generous, to simply catch it before it landed. Not with a spell, just with will. He suppressed it, every time. The caution from that first night in the common room had settled into a working principle. He was not hiding, but he was not performing. He would learn the local language before he started speaking freely. That was the plan anyway. The plan lasted until Thursday's flying lesson. The morning was sharp and cold, the kind of September morning that smells like the beginning of something. They gathered on the lawn in a ragged line, 11-year-olds in robes that didn't quite fit right, and Madame Hooch stood in front of them with the brisk authority of someone who had watched 1,000 children fall off brooms and was philosophically at peace with it. "Stick your right hand over your broom and say up," Harry said it. The broom leapt into his hand before the word was fully out, not a jump, not a wobble, a clean, eager snap like a dog responding to its name. He felt the magic in it, a simple sentient adjacent thing, a charm that responded to intention, and his intention was apparently very clear. He noticed Hermione watching from 3 spots down the line where her broom had yet to do more than roll slightly. He kept his face neutral. They mounted up. Hooch walked the line, correcting grips and postures. Harry held his broom and felt the air around him, actually felt it, its currents and pressures, with a spatial awareness that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago and was now simply there, like an extra sense that had always been promised and finally arrived. He understood the physics of flight without having to think about it. The broom wanted to rise, the air would support it, the variables were wind speed and angle and the distribution of magical intent along the handle, which responded to the rider's body the way a compass responds to north. He was fairly certain standard first-year flying instruction didn't cover it in those terms. "Now on my whistle," Hooch was saying. "I want each of you to." Neville went up before the whistle. Harry was watching him. He'd been keeping a peripheral eye on Neville all morning, because Neville had the specific energy of someone who was going to have a bad time through no fault of his own. And he saw the moment the broom bucked upward, caught the wrong current, and sent Neville scrambling for his life 10, 15, 20 feet up and climbing. Around him, students froze or shrieked or took a step back. Hooch was already moving, calling up at him, trying to talk him through what to lean into and what to ease off. Neville's broom spun once sharply. Neville lost his grip. Harry was already moving, not dramatically. There was no running start, no shouted spell. He simply pushed off from the ground with one foot, mounted his broom and went up. In one fluid motion, with none of the wobbling or overcorrection that characterized first-time riders, he was 20 feet in the air and crossing the distance between himself and Neville with an ease that made it look obvious. He pulled alongside Neville's broom, grabbed the handle with one hand, and wrapped his other arm around Neville's shoulders just as the boy let go completely. They sank together, controlled, steady, none of the terrifying freefall it should have been, and landed on the lawn with 2 soft thumps. Neville sat on the grass for a moment, breathing. "You all right?" Harry asked. Neville said, which was probably yes. Harry stood up and turned around. 20 students and 1 instructor were staring at him. The silence had the quality of something that had just fundamentally changed shape. Madame Hooch's expression cycled through several things in quick succession: alarm, relief, assessment, and landed somewhere specific. She covered the lawn in 10 long strides and looked at Harry with the eyes of someone who had spent 30 years sorting students into categories of can't fly, can fly, and something else entirely. "How long have you been on a broom, Potter?" "Today," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment longer. "Right," she said quietly. "Right," then she raised her voice. "Back in line, everyone, Longbottom, on your feet when you're ready, no rush." She didn't put Harry back in line. She stood beside him as the class reformed and said in a voice pitched only for him, "You want to tell me how a first-time rider pulls off a maneuver it takes most students 2 years to learn?" "I could see what the air was doing," Harry said. "It was true, incomplete but true." Hooch studied him. "Natural," she said, "rare but natural." A pause. "Ever considered Quidditch? Someone mentioned it might come up." She smiled briefly and turned back to her class. Harry watched her go and then looked across the lawn to where Hermione was watching him with her arms folded and her expression doing the thing where she was deciding something. She caught his eye. He lifted his shoulder in a shrug. She shook her head slowly, like he was a problem she was going to solve whether he wanted her to or not, and went back to coaxing her broom off the ground. Harry honestly didn't mind. McGonagall found him after lunch. He'd been sitting on the steps outside the entrance hall with Ron, listening to a comprehensive breakdown of the Weasley family's history with brooms. Apparently Charlie had been scouted by national teams, which Ron mentioned with the tone of someone simultaneously proud and exhausted by the shadow, when the professor appeared at the top of the steps with the specific purposefulness of a woman who always knew where she was going. "Potter, a word." Ron's eyebrows went up. Harry followed McGonagall inside, through 2 corridors and up a half staircase, to a small office that smelled like parchment and was absolutely covered in papers arranged in an order that only made sense to someone who designed the system. She closed the door behind them, gestured at a chair, and sat behind her desk with the composure of someone who was going to tell him something officially and then separately tell him how she actually felt about it. Madam Hooch came to see me this morning, she said. I figured. She tells me what you did in flying class was, a pause, technically illegal. First-year students are not permitted on Quidditch pitches or to ride brooms unsupervised. I wasn't being supervised, Harry agreed. Number McGonagall's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. You were being useful. There is a distinction and I am choosing to honor it. She opened a drawer and set a folded piece of parchment on the desk. I'd like you to try out for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, seeker position. Training begins next week. Harry looked at the parchment. I'm a first year. Yes, first years aren't allowed on the team. There's a rule. There are exceptions to rules, McGonagall said, when the circumstances warrant them. This is an exception. Dumbledore has agreed. She pushed the parchment an inch toward him. Oliver Wood will want to work with you immediately. He's enthusiastic. She said the word with the careful neutrality of someone describing a tornado as energetic. Harry reached out and took the parchment. Thank you, Professor. Don't thank me. Win. She stood up, which was a clear dismissal. Harry stood as well, tucked the parchment into his robe, and was almost at the door when she said, without particular inflection, Potter. He turned. McGonagall was not looking at him. She was looking at a spot on the wall slightly above his left shoulder, with the expression of someone choosing words carefully. Whatever happened in that flying lesson, the speed of it, the control, I want you to know that this school is quite well equipped to handle exceptional students. A brief pause. If you ever feel that the standard curriculum isn't quite, she stopped, started again. My door is open. Harry held her gaze for a moment. She was not asking him to explain himself. She was making sure he knew someone had noticed and that the noticing was safe. It was the most tactful thing he'd ever been offered. I appreciate that, he said. He meant it completely. He found the threads more easily now. It was becoming natural, the same way you stop noticing your breathing until something reminds you. He would simply glance at something or someone or some stretch of corridor, and the magical architecture would come clear without any effort at all. Hogwarts was endlessly readable in this way, and Harry was learning its grammar the way you learn a city, one repeated route at a time. He knew, for instance, that the enchantments on the fourth floor were heavier and older than the ones on the floors below. Something defensive, something structural, running through the stone like rebar. He knew that the astronomy tower had a permanent weather-reading charm so delicately calibrated, it was essentially a living thing. He knew that the Great Hall's ceiling enchantment drew its power not from any continuous spell casting, but from an anchor point buried beneath the foundations, somewhere deep in the castle's bedrock, where the original builders had laid something fundamental that still pulsed, 800 years later, like a heartbeat. He knew that the third-floor corridor was wrong. He'd known it the first time he passed it, which had been accidental on the second day, when he'd made a wrong turn following a staircase that moved mid-climb and deposited him on a floor he hadn't intended. He'd felt the wrongness before he saw the door, a cold pressure in the air that had nothing to do with temperature. He'd looked at the door from 20 feet away and seen the enchantments on it, and they were nothing like the rest of the castle. They were newer, for one thing, layered on in the last decade, maybe less, and they were not decorative or structural. They were containment. Something behind that door needed to stay contained. He'd stood there for a long moment and then gone back downstairs, because knowing something is behind a door is not the same as needing to open it immediately, and Harry had learned at the Dursleys that patience was a more useful tool than urgency in almost every situation. But he thought about it, regularly, and he thought about Quirrell. Defense against the dark arts should have been his favorite subject. Conceptually, it was exactly what it said on the label, the study of dark magic and how to survive it, which felt immediately relevant given his history. He'd gone into the first lesson with genuine interest and come out 40 minutes later with a deeply uncomfortable feeling he'd spent the next 2 days trying to articulate. Quirrell was wrong in the same way the third-floor corridor was wrong. Not identical, the corridor's wrongness was the contained, pressurized wrongness of a thing trying very hard not to be noticed. Quirrell's wrongness was more layered. On the surface, he performed convincingly. The stammer, the nervousness, the enthusiastic but slightly chaotic lesson structure. He asked good questions. He knew his material. He had the class half convinced he was simply an anxious man who'd had a rough year in Albania. But Harry's sight went beneath the surface without asking his permission. And beneath the surface, woven into the magical signature of the man himself, was something Harry had no name for yet, something cold and purposeful and patient that wore Quirrell the way you wear a coat in winter, not because you are the coat but because you need it to function in the cold. There were 2 magical signatures in that body. Harry was certain of it. He'd sat in the back of the classroom and taken notes and said nothing. He'd answered questions when called on and gotten them right and watched Quirrell's eyes track to him with an attention that was not quite teacherly. He'd smiled when appropriate. He'd been by every visible measure a model student. But he'd also been memorizing the second signature, its shape, its texture, the cold specific quality of it, the way you memorize the gait of something you might need to outrun. He hadn't told Ron or Hermione, not yet. He was still deciding how. The conversation happened on a Sunday, 3 weeks into term, in a corner of the library that Hermione had essentially colonized with stacked books and color-coded notes. Harry sat down across from her, looked at the 17 books she had opened simultaneously, and said, "Can I ask you something weird?" "Everything you do is slightly weird," Hermione said. She didn't look up. "But yes." Ron was at the other end of the table, working through an astronomy chart with the concentration of someone diffusing something delicate. He looked up at Harry's tone. "How weird?" "Moderately." Harry kept his voice low, not from secrecy but from the library-specific instinct to keep volume down. "What do you know about the third-floor corridor?" Hermione's quill stopped. "Dumbledore said not to go there," Ron said immediately. "At the feast said it was out of bounds." "I know what he said." Harry looked at Hermione, who had set her quill down now and was looking at him with the full force of her attention, which was considerable. "Have you felt anything, walking past it?" "I haven't walked past it," she said. "I've been avoiding it." "Smart," Harry said. "I haven't avoided it." A pause. "Of course you haven't," she said in the tone of someone confirming a hypothesis. "What did you feel? Something's being kept there, something that needs heavy containment charms." He watched her face. "Whatever it is, it's not just restricted for first-year safety rules. Those enchantments are recent, purposeful, and specifically designed to keep something in." Or he paused. "To keep something from being taken out." Hermione stared at him. Ron had abandoned the astronomy chart. "You can see enchantments," Ron said. "Like look at a wall and just more or less." Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at Hermione for guidance. She was doing her recalibrating face, the one Harry had seen on the train, where she took in new information and updated her model of the world without wasting time on denial. "Since when?" she asked. "Since the train," Harry said. It was the most he'd told either of them. He watched it land and waited. "The train," she repeated. "Something changed on the train. Something changed on the train." She looked at him for a very long time. He could see her wanting to ask the obvious follow-up question and making the decision. The intelligent, generous decision to wait until he was ready to tell her. He appreciated that more than he could easily say. "All right," she said, "so there's something on the third floor. What do you want to do about it?" "Nothing yet," Harry said. "I'm just making sure someone else knows I know." Ron looked between them. "Right, great, that's very responsible, and I'm sure nothing interesting will happen because of it at all." "Ron, I'm not complaining," Ron said. "I'm just noting, for the record, that we've been here 3 weeks and we're already having the kind of conversation I was promised wouldn't happen until at least second year." Harry grinned. It was the first genuine grin of the day, uncomplicated and real. "Look," he said, "I'm not planning anything, I'm observing. There's a difference." "There is a difference," Hermione said firmly, and then undermined it completely by adding, "Although I do think we should gather more information before we make any judgments about." "There it is," Ron said. "The nature of the enchantments, because even if Harry can perceive them, there are a number of things that might logically be stored under containment charms that aren't necessarily." "She's not saying don't do it," Ron translated for Harry. "She's saying do it properly." "I know," Harry said. "I like that about her." Hermione stopped mid-sentence and looked at him. He looked back. She picked up her quill again, which was as close to flustered as he'd seen her get. "I also want to talk about Quirrell," Harry said. The quill stopped again. Ron's head came up. "He's our teacher," Ron said carefully. "He is," Harry agreed, "and I think we should watch him." The first Quidditch practice was on a Friday evening, cold enough that Harry could see his breath, and Oliver Wood met him on the pitch with the energy of someone who had been waiting for this moment since approximately his own birth. "Right," Wood said by way of greeting. "I've heard things about your flying, from Hooch." "From Hooch, from Fred and George, from a third-year called Marcus who saw you from a window and apparently nearly fell out of it." Wood handed Harry a broom, not the school broom, a better one, a Nimbus 1900 with the seriousness of a general issuing a weapon. "I want to see what you can actually do before I decide if any of it's real." Harry took the broom. "What do you want me to do?" "Up full speed, 2 laps of the pitch. Tell me your ceiling before you start feeling the wind resistance." Harry went up. He heard Wood's sharp intake of breath when he hit full speed, which he found quietly satisfying. The air at height was clean and knife-edged, and Harry opened his senses into it without thinking. The currents, the pressure points, the pocket of still air above the east goalposts that would play havoc with aim from that angle. He read the pitch the way he read rooms, the way he read people, through that layered perception that had become simply how he processed the world. He spotted the snitch before Wood released it. Not because he had extraordinary eyesight, though his spatial awareness was useful, but because the snitch had a trace of enchantment on it that his sight picked up at distance, a little golden blur of charmwork against the darker sky. He was on it in 6 seconds, hovered in place with it pinched between his fingers, and came back down to Wood, who was standing on the ground with his mouth open. 6 seconds, Wood said. The air pocket above the east goals, Harry said. It'll push your chasers' shots left on windy days. Wood blinked. How do you? I could feel it from up there. Harry handed the snitch over. You should rotate play to the west on high wind match days. Force the opposing keeper to cover the longer angle. Wood stared at him for a long, very still moment. You've played before, he said. You must have. First time on a broom was last Thursday. Another long moment. Wood sat down on the grass like someone who needed to sit down and think about things. Right, he said eventually. Right, okay, he looked up. Charlie Weasley was the best seeker I'd played with before tonight. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, Wood said. He stood back up with the briskness of someone getting back to business. You want to run it again with a beater putting pressure on you from the south? Yeah, Harry said. He was already rising. Send Fred up, or George. Whoever hits harder, that's, Wood almost laughed. That's George, and he'll be very pleased you asked. Harry went back up into the clean, cold dark, and the snitch was somewhere in the air above him, and below him the pitch lights blazed amber, and he felt the fire in his chest steady and warm and certain, and he thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not hiding, not squeezing himself into a small shape, not pretending to be less so that the people around him could be more comfortable, just this. Being exactly as large as he actually was. The night he went to the third-floor corridor alone, he didn't plan it. It was past midnight. He couldn't sleep, not uncommon. The castle made sounds at night that his new perception filled in with meaning. The creak and shift of 8 centuries of settled stone. And he'd been lying in the dark of the first-year dormitory listening to Ron sleep and thinking about Quirrell's eyes when he decided, quietly and without drama, to just go look at the door. He took the invisibility cloak. He'd found it in his trunk on the second day, wrapped around a note in handwriting he didn't recognize that said simply your father's. Keep it close. He hadn't shown anyone. He wore it now, bare feet on cold stone, and moved through the sleeping castle with a silence that the mystic arts training in his blood had apparently included as a standard feature. The third floor was darker than the floors below. The torches here were spaced further apart, burning with the slightly blue tint of magical flame rather than natural fire. The corridor smelled like stone and age, and something underneath that, something cold and damp like a cave system. Harry walked to the door and stood in front of it and took the cloak off, because he was not hiding from the door. He pressed his right hand flat against the wood. The enchantments blazed up at his touch: containment charms, alarm wards, a particularly brutal locking hex layered over a standard Alohomora block, and beneath all of them the sense of something alive, something breathing, something very large. He could feel its magical signature through the door the way you can feel heat through glass. Not threatening, sleeping, more like, but enormous. He stood there for a while with his palm on the door, reading it, cataloging what he found. The containment was solid, Dumbledore's work, he was fairly certain, because it had that same distinctive solar quality he'd glimpsed at the feast. Nobody was getting through this door without either Dumbledore's permission or a considerable amount of effort. Harry was not going to open the door, not tonight. But he pressed his hand flat against it and let his sight go as deep as it could, and past the enormous sleeping thing, past the containment charms and the locking hexes and the Guardian, he found what the Guardian was guarding. An object, small relative to the room. Dense with enchantment, staggeringly dense, layered with spells cast by multiple hands across what felt like a long span of time. He couldn't see it clearly, only its shape in the magical sense. Compact, cylindrical, or nearly so, radiating a power that had nothing to do with aggression or harm and everything to do with creation, with permanence, with the specific quality of something designed to make things last. He lowered his hand, stood in the corridor. Something is being kept safe here, he thought. And someone wants it enough that Dumbledore put a Cerberus-sized guardian in front of it. And Professor Quirrell has 2 magical signatures in one body, and one of them is cold and patient and looking for something. He put these 3 facts beside each other and looked at the picture they made. Then he picked up his invisibility cloak, threw it back over his shoulders, and walked quietly back toward Gryffindor Tower with the specific focused calm of someone who has just understood the shape of the problem they are in. He was not frightened. The fire in his chest burned clear and even. He was paying attention. That was the thing Strange had left him, not just power but perception. The ability to see the structure of things, to read what was real beneath what was presented. And what was real here, in this old castle full of moving staircases and talking portraits and a headmaster who had sat at that feast and looked at Harry with careful, calculating blue eyes, what was real was this: something was coming. Something that had been in motion for a long time. And Harry was not going to stand at the edge of it and wait for it to arrive. He took the stairs 2 at a time, quiet as thought, and the castle breathed around him, and somewhere below, in the cold and the dark of a third-floor room, something enormous and ancient shifted in its sleep. Chapter 3. Fire and Doctrine. October arrived the way it always does in Scotland, without apology. The mornings turned the color of iron, the lake went dark and choppy, and the castle corridors filled with the smell of wet wool and wood smoke and whatever Neville had most recently managed to melt in potions. The trees at the edge of the forbidden forest dropped their leaves all at once, like they'd made a collective decision, and the grounds went from green to the deep amber brown of a world getting ready to go quiet. Harry barely noticed. He was busy. Quidditch practice 3 times a week. Classes every day, including a Thursday double potions that was becoming its own particular study in human nature. Flying on his own in the early mornings when the pitch was empty and the air was still, and he could push his limits without an audience, higher, faster, sharper turns than Oliver Wood had seen yet. Reading, always reading, not just the curriculum but the deeper shelves of the library, where Hermione was systematically working through the restricted sections index with the specific energy of someone who had decided that rules were guidelines for people without sufficient context. And watching Quirrell. That had become its own quiet project, running underneath everything else like a current. He sat in defense against the dark arts twice a week and took perfect notes and answered questions and watched the man perform his anxiety with the attention of an audience member who knows the show is a show. Quirrell was good at it. The stammer came and went convincingly. He laughed at himself at the right moments. He occasionally appeared to forget a spell's name and then remember it with theatrical relief. But his eyes were wrong. Not always, not when he was in the full flow of teaching, when the performance occupied most of his attention. But in the margins, in the seconds between questions and answers, in the moments when he looked at Harry and thought Harry wasn't looking back, the eyes were too steady, too patient. They watched with a quality that had nothing to do with Quirinus Quirrell and everything to do with the cold second signature Harry had been mapping since September. He was building a picture. He was taking his time, and then there was Snape. Potions on Thursdays was a different experience from every other lesson, which was saying something in a school where history of magic was taught by a ghost who occasionally forgot he'd already covered the topic and looped back 30 years in his notes. Snape's classroom was in the dungeons, cold stone, poor lighting, the smell of something indefinably organic, and Snape himself stood at the front of it like a weather system. Dark robes, dark eyes, the kind of stillness that suggested enormous and carefully managed energy behind it. Harry had looked at Snape's magical signature on the first day and found it genuinely interesting. Complicated. A lot of personal history written into the way magic settled around a person. And Snape's was dense with it, old grief, old anger, the structural marks of someone who had made themselves into a weapon a long time ago and was not entirely sure, now, what to do with a weapon in peacetime. He had also looked at Harry on day 1 and said, "Potter, our new celebrity, tell me what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry had looked at him calmly and said, "A sleeping potion so powerful it's known as the draught of living death, sir." A silence. "Where did you read that?" Snape's voice was flat with controlled surprise. "Most potent potions," Harry said. "It's in the restricted section, but Hermione pulled the index card and I cross-referenced it with." "That will do," Snape said. He looked at Harry for a moment longer than necessary, and Harry looked back without any particular expression, and something moved through Snape's face that wasn't quite annoyance and wasn't quite respect and was certainly something. Then he turned to the board and began the lesson. Since then they'd reached an arrangement. Snape asked him difficult questions. Harry answered them accurately. Snape made no particular effort to humiliate him, which Ron had told him was unprecedented, while Hermione pointed out that Snape simply went after people who were wrong rather than people who were right, which Ron said missed the point, which led to an argument Harry didn't involve himself in. What mattered was that Snape was watching him too. Different from Dumbledore's watching, different from Quirrell's, more personal, more tangled up in things Harry didn't have the full history for yet, but there, he was becoming used to being watched. He was deciding deliberately not to find it uncomfortable. The morning of October 31st was ordinary right up until it wasn't. Harry spent it in a pleasant sort of half-attention that he developed for days with no particular crisis scheduled. Present in lessons, aware of everything, running on a lower level of active processing. He and Ron had herbology in the morning, which was good because Professor Sprout's greenhouse was warm and smelled like earth and didn't require any part of him to be on high alert. Neville was in his element there in a way he wasn't anywhere else, quick-handed, confident, talking to the mandrakes under his breath in a way Sprout encouraged and Ron found slightly unnerving. Lunch was loud and good. Hermione appeared 15 minutes late with ink on her ear and a look of someone who had found something interesting in the library and lost track of time, which was happening approximately 4 times a week, and showed no sign of stopping. I found references to Flamel, she said, sitting down and reaching for bread without preamble. Harry looked at her. Ron looked at her. They had had the conversation, the three of them, over several evenings in the common room about the contained object on the third floor, working from what Harry had sensed and what Hermione could research and what Ron knew from the kind of family knowledge that doesn't make it into books. It was Ron who'd suggested Nicholas Flamel based on a half-remembered comment from his father, and Hermione had been chasing it since. And, Harry said, I can't tell you here. She looked around the great hall with the theatricality of someone who had recently discovered they enjoyed espionage. Later, common room. Hermione, later, she said firmly and began eating her lunch. Harry accepted this. He looked up the table toward the teacher's platform, where Quirrell was eating alone at one end with his back to the wall in a way that had nothing to do with food preferences and everything to do with the positioning instincts of someone, something that did not like to be approached from behind. He watched Quirrell for a moment, then looked away. The afternoon passed. Charms, then a free period Harry spent on the pitch with his broom and the sky. He found flying easier every session, not just easier but more fluent, the way speaking a language becomes fluent so that the words stop being individual acts of construction and become simply expression. He didn't just fly the broom now. He moved through the air and the broom was how. The distinction felt important. He was coming back down from the pitch, broom over his shoulder, when Flitwick caught him at the door to the changing rooms with an expression of someone who had been looking for him. Ah, Potter, just a moment, I've been meaning to speak with you. Your practical work in class has been, well, he paused. Flitwick was a good teacher partly because he was honest. You're not struggling, are you? No, sir. Number, I see that. He tilted his head. He was a very small man and the gesture was very bird-like. I was wondering if you might be interested in some additional reading. Nothing compulsory, purely elective. There are some texts on advanced charms theory that might give you more to work with than the standard curriculum is currently offering. Harry looked at him. I'd like that. Flitwick brightened. Excellent, I'll leave some titles at the front desk for you. There are theories in charms that most students don't encounter until 6th or 7th year: spatial charms, sympathetic resonance, the mathematics of intent. He caught himself. Well, I won't lecture in the corridor, but I think you'll find them interesting. A pause. You have a very unusual magical signature, Mr. Potter, if you'll forgive my saying so. I've been teaching for 40 years and I find I'm curious. About what? Harry asked. Flitwick smiled. About what you'll be able to do with it. He stepped aside and gestured toward the castle. Enjoy your evening. Harry watched him go and thought, he can see it too. Not with the same clarity Harry could see things. Flitwick was working from magical sensitivity, decades of practice reading students, a teacher's particular ability to perceive potential. But he was seeing something. He was the third teacher now after McGonagall and Snape who was looking at Harry with that particular attention. Dumbledore, of course, had been looking since September 1st. The troll arrived with the evening. Harry and Ron had been on their way down to the Halloween feast. The Great Hall was doing something extraordinary, pumpkins the size of armchairs floating at ceiling height in streaming orange candlelight, when Hermione intercepted them in the third-floor stairwell with news about Flamel, which led to a heated back and forth that somehow resulted in Hermione in tears. Ron had said something clumsy and inaccurate about her lack of friends, which Harry had immediately said was unfair. And Hermione had gone off toward the girls' bathroom on the second floor in the specific way of someone who needed 5 minutes to be upset in private. Harry and Ron went to the feast. Harry ate and listened to nearly headless Nick deliver an extremely detailed account of a goblin rebellion, and watched Quirrell across the hall and felt the cold second signature pulsing with something that tonight felt less like patience and more like anticipation. Then Quirrell came stumbling in. The performance was good. Harry would give him that. The stammer, the wild eyes, the dramatic collapse against a table leg, convincing enough that the whole hall went to panic within 30 seconds. Students pushing back from benches, teachers rising, Dumbledore already on his feet with his wand in hand. Troll in the dungeons, Quirrell gasped. Thought you ought to know. He fainted. Dumbledore called for calm. Prefects organized the evacuation. The hall moved in controlled streams toward dormitories, and in the noise and movement Harry grabbed Ron's arm. Hermione, he said, she doesn't know. Ron went pale. Second-floor bathroom, they were already moving against the current of students, which required some active effort and a couple of creative explanations to prefects who tried to redirect them. Harry took the stairs fast, reading the castle's ambient energy as he went. There was something wrong in the air, a disturbance several floors below. The kind of magical displacement that something very large and very stupid makes when it moves through a space it barely fits in. The troll was in the dungeons, Quirrell had said. Except Harry felt the disturbance getting closer as they ran down the second-floor corridor, not further away, And there was the particular smell, mountain troll, he knew without knowing how he knew, the specific combination of cave damp and something sulfurous drifting from around the corner ahead. "It's on this floor," Harry said. Ron grabbed his arm. "But Quirrell lied," Harry said. He was not running anymore. He was walking, quick and purposeful, toward the smell because running toward a troll was exactly as unwise as it sounded, and he needed to be thinking, not just moving. "The girls' bathroom is around this corner." They came around it together. The troll was 12 feet of gray muscle and surprising speed, currently attempting to turn around in a corridor that was 3 feet too narrow for it to manage comfortably. It had a club, a massive, stupid thing, essentially a tree trunk with the branches removed, and it was doing considerable damage to the stone walls in the process of turning. The smell was extraordinary. The troll's magical signature was the simplest thing Harry had ever read, almost no structure to it at all, just size and aggression and a baseline sentience that barely qualified for the word. From inside the bathroom, he could hear Hermione screaming. Ron said Wingardium Leviosa, with impressive instinct, and the club jerked upward, which made the troll look at the ceiling with the specific confusion of something whose entire cognitive model had just been violated. The club fell back and hit the troll on the head, which did not knock it out. Harry had not expected it to, but disoriented it enough that it stopped trying to reach the bathroom door. Then it turned to find who had done that, and it found Harry. Harry was standing in the middle of the corridor with his hands loose at his sides and his weight evenly balanced and his wand not drawn. He was looking at the troll with the same quality of attention he gave everything, reading its weight, its momentum, the specific angle of its shoulders that told him it was about to swing to the right, and the troll looked back at him with the tiny reddish eyes of something that processed the world primarily in terms of what it could hit. He let it charge, not because he was showing off. Because a 12-foot troll in a corridor has exactly 2 directions, forward and not forward, and stopping the forward momentum was easier than redirecting it. Harry stepped to the left at the last possible moment, caught a handful of the troll's rough skin as it passed, and sent a pulse of force through the contact point. Not magic, or not precisely magic, not the wand magic he'd been learning in class, the mystic arts equivalent of a redirect, feeling the troll's momentum and using it rather than fighting it. The troll hit the wall. The impact was enormous. Stone cracked. The troll sat down. Ron stood at the end of the corridor with his mouth open. As Harry walked to the bathroom doors, "Hermione, it's us, come out." There was a pause. Hermione came out. Her face was wet and her robes were dusty, and she looked at Harry, then at the troll sitting against the cracked wall making a low sound of profound confusion, then back at Harry. "You," she said. "Yeah. How did you?" "Later," Harry said. He looked at Ron, who was still stationary at the end of the corridor with his mouth still open. "Ron, you all right? You used it," Ron said. "The whatever it is you can do, you used it." "I used physics," Harry said, which was technically true. "You redirected a 12-foot troll with your hand. I had help from its momentum." Harry looked at the troll, which was now lying flat on the corridor floor making a sound between a groan and a snore. "Out for the count, or close enough. We should be here when the teachers arrive." "Less explaining." Hermione, who had recovered with the speed of someone whose primary mode is analysis, said, "Less explaining would require a consistent story." "We heard you scream," Harry said. "We came to help. We found the troll already like this." He looked at her. "Unless you'd like to explain my methodology to McGonagall." Hermione looked at the troll. "It was already like this," she agreed, in the decisive tone of someone committing to a narrative. McGonagall arrived 45 seconds later with Snape and Quirrell behind her, and found 3 students standing in a corridor next to an unconscious troll, and did the math with visible speed. She was furious and frightened and enormously relieved, and the fury won for the first 30 seconds. What were they thinking coming down here? School rules, danger, incredibly irresponsible. And then Hermione, who surprised all 3 of them, said that she'd gone looking for the troll herself because she'd read about them and thought she could manage it, and Harry and Ron had come after her. McGonagall looked at Hermione. "That was very foolish, Miss Granger." "I know," Hermione said. McGonagall looked at Harry. Harry looked back. She said nothing to him, but something moved in her expression that was more complicated than a first year and an unconscious troll should have warranted. Behind McGonagall, Harry watched Quirrell looking at the troll with an expression that wasn't confusion or relief. It was something much more specific, a rapid internal calculation that crossed his face for half a second before the performance came back up. That was interesting. So was the fact that Quirrell was standing slightly to the side, and the cold second signature was radiating, right now, at twice its usual intensity, the way a fire burns hotter when you open the window and give it air. The troll had been a distraction, Harry was fairly certain. For what specifically, he was building a theory about. He filed the expression on Quirrell's face away and said nothing, and let McGonagall finish her speech, and took the not-quite punishment she handed them. 5 points from Gryffindor for Ron, 5 from Harry, 5 for Hermione to offset the theoretical points she'd earned by taking responsibility. And by the time they were walking back to the common room through the quieting castle, the feast having been ended and students dispersed, he had decided it was time to talk properly. The common room was empty except for Percy Weasley, who was waiting at the top of the stairs with his prefect badge and an expression that suggested he'd been practicing a speech, which he delivered efficiently. Incredibly dangerous, school rules, as your prefect I have a responsibility, and then appeared to clock something in Harry's demeanor that made him wrap up faster than he'd planned and go to bed. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat in the chairs closest to the fire. Hermione had a book already, because Hermione defaulted to books the way other people defaulted to deep breaths. She put it on her knee but didn't open it. Ron sat with his elbows on his knees and the look of someone who had been composing questions for approximately 40 minutes. Right, Ron said. Talk. Harry looked at the fire, then at his friends. The word friends was still new enough that it registered each time he used it internally with a small warmth distinct from the larger fire in his chest. I'm going to tell you more than I've told you, he said. I haven't been lying. I've been waiting until I understood it well enough to explain. Understood, Hermione said, with the tone of someone who did not consider this entirely acceptable behavior but was willing to hear the case. On the train, Harry said, something happened. I felt it happen, like something settling into me, something that was already shaped like a person but wasn't me. He paused, trying to find words for it that weren't entirely inadequate. Someone who was dying, I think, far away in I don't know another world, something like that. The last thing they did before they died was give me what they had. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up and was doing something to the turrets that made a low, throaty sound. Power, Hermione said quietly. Power, Harry confirmed. And more than that, instinct, knowledge I didn't know I had until I needed it, the ability to see magic. The ability to use it in ways that aren't wand-based. He looked at his right hand, turned it over. I can feel the structure of enchantments, I can redirect force, I haven't tested all of it yet, I'm still learning what it is. Ron said, you used it on the troll, a small part of it. A small part of it knocked out a 12-foot troll. The wall knocked out the troll, Harry said patiently. I redirected the troll into the wall. Right, yes, very different. Ron sat back. So you're what, twice as magical as normal? You've got 2 kinds. Different kinds, Harry said. They're not the same thing. Wizarding magic is specific, spells, incantations, wand work. The other thing is more, he thought about it, architectural. It works with the structure of things, with space and force and the way magic moves through the world. Hermione had been very still during this. Now she said, show me something. Harry looked at her. Right now, not the troll thing, something smaller, I want to see it. He looked at the fire in the hearth. He extended one hand, palm up, and gathered a small portion of the larger fire in his chest. The same way he'd done in the common room on the first night, except with more control now, a month of quiet practice behind it. The light gathered in his palm, golden white, steady, warm without heat, pulsing gently with his heartbeat. Hermione leaned forward. Her face in the light of it was very young and very sharp and entirely focused. It's not a spell, she said. It wasn't a question. Number, the wand does nothing. I didn't use a wand. The incantation? None. She sat back. She was running something through her head with the speed and precision of a very good calculator. So it's pure will, pure intent. No framework, no verbal component, no channeling mechanism. It doesn't need one. Because the channeling mechanism is you. She stared at his palm. It's the most efficient form of magic theoretically possible. Wands are just a focus tool. Incantations are a structuring mechanism. If you can do without both, she stopped. Harry, yeah, how much of what you can do have you actually tested? Not much, he said honestly. I've been careful. Why? The question was direct and not unkind. He looked at her. Because I can feel how big it is, and I think it takes time to understand something properly before you push its limits. A long pause. That might be the most sensible thing you've said since September, she said. What about the troll? Ron offered. The troll was a controlled situation, Harry said. The troll was a 12-foot, Ron. Harry closed his hand. The light went out. I knew I could handle it. Ron processed this. Right, yeah, of course you did. He looked at Hermione. This is fine. This is completely fine. I've been watching Quirrell, Harry said, and moved the conversation forward before Ron could spiral. I need you to know what I know. He told them. The double signature, the cold, patient quality of it, the difference between the performance and what was underneath. The way Quirrell had looked at the troll tonight, not confused, not relieved, calculating. The way the cold signature had spiked at the same moment, Harry suspected it was looking for something specific. The third-floor corridor, Hermione said immediately. Whatever it's protecting, Harry said. Tonight was a distraction attempt. The troll was meant to pull the teachers in one direction while something went to the 3rd floor. Something, Hermione said carefully. The second signature in Quirrell, Harry said. Whatever's been sharing his body since Albania, it's not Quirrell. Quirrell is he's there underneath, but he's largely been, he paused, replaced, or overwritten. Something is wearing him. The fire in the hearth had burned low. Outside, the wind pushed against the castle walls and the castle absorbed it without effort. Voldemort, Ron whispered. He'd gone pale. I think so, Harry said. He said it without fear and watched both of them register that. I think whatever's left of him found a host, and the host is our defense teacher, and whatever is on the third floor, the Sorcerer's Stone, Hermione said. They both looked at her. She'd finally opened the book on her knee. She turned it toward them, an old encyclopedia, Great Wizards of the 20th Century, open to a marked page. Nicholas Flamel, she said, pointing at the text. He's the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, also called the Sorcerer's Stone in some traditions. It can turn metal to gold and produce the elixir of life, which grants immortality. She looked up. If Voldemort needed something to return to full power to get a body back, he'd want the stone, Harry finished. The three of them sat with that for a moment. He didn't get it tonight, Harry said. Whatever he tried, the Guardians stopped it or he didn't have enough time. But he'll try again, Ron said. He'll try again, Harry nodded, which means we have time to think. Snape found Harry the next morning, not in class, it was a Saturday. Harry was in the corridor outside the library when Snape materialized from around a corner with the purposefulness of someone who had been looking and knew where to look. A word, Potter. It wasn't a question. Harry followed him. Snape's office was below the library, further into the dungeons than his classroom, a long, low-ceilinged room lined with shelves of bottled things that ranged from interesting to deeply unpleasant. Snape sat behind a desk and Harry sat across from it, and they looked at each other for a moment. I understand you had an encounter with a troll last night, Snape said. Yes, sir. Tell me what happened. I've already told Professor McGonagall. Tell me what actually happened, Snape said. His voice was flat, precise, and carried the specific quality of someone who knows there is a gap between the official version and the true version. Not the story you and Miss Granger agreed on. What happened? Harry looked at him. Snape looked back, black eyes steady, and Harry did the thing he'd been learning to do, read the signature, read the person inside it. What he found in Snape was not cruelty, though the capacity for it was there. What he found was the structure of someone who had spent a very long time watching things from positions no one else could occupy and was deeply tired of being the only one who saw them. I redirected the troll into the wall, Harry said, without a spell. Snape's expression did not change. Without a wand, a long silence. Something moved behind Snape's eyes that was not easy to read, complex, dense, historical. He leaned back slightly. I have been teaching at this school for 10 years, he said. I have seen most of what wizarding ability can produce. I have not seen an 11-year-old handle a mountain troll without a wand. A pause. Where did you learn it? I didn't learn it, Harry said. It came to me on the 1st of September. I think someone gave it to me. Someone, Snape said. Someone who was dying and didn't want it to disappear. Snape was quiet for so long that the bottled things on the shelves seemed to settle further into their jars. Your mother, he said eventually, and it was very soft, and it was not what Harry had expected him to say, and the look on his face during the 2 seconds before he replaced it with neutrality was something Harry would not forget. She had a quality to her magic that I have never seen in anyone else, a directness, a resistance to any frame that tried to limit it. He looked at the desk. I wondered if it passed to you. It's not that, Harry said carefully. What I have, it's different from wizarding magic. It works beside it, not through it. Show me. Harry looked at his hand. He brought a small flame to his palm, the golden white point of light, steady and warm. Snape looked at it for a very long time. My God, he said quietly, it was not reverent. It was the sound of a man who has been building a theory for months and just received its confirmation. How much of this can you control? More than I could in September, Harry said. I'm still learning. Does Dumbledore know? Dumbledore suspects something, Harry said. He's watching. Dumbledore is always watching, Snape said. Something sharp moved in his voice when he said it. And Quirrell. Harry looked at him steadily. You noticed too. I have noticed, Snape said. Since the beginning of term, he stopped. I have been watching Professor Quirrell for reasons of my own. He met Harry's eyes. What do you know? 2 magical signatures in one body, Harry said. The troll last night was a distraction for an attempt on the 3rd floor. He'll try again. Snape's jaw tightened. Yes, he said quietly, he will. He looked at Harry for another long moment, and what lived in that look was complicated, old pain, old loyalty, something that had decided who it belonged to long before Harry Potter was born and had never uncompromised. You will not confront Quirrell, he said. Do you understand? Not alone. I'm not planning to confront anyone, Harry said honestly. I'm gathering information. Information, Snape said with the tone of someone who finds the choice of word both accurate and insufficient. And when you have enough, then I'll make a decision, Harry said. It was the most honest answer he could give, and he suspected Snape knew it. The potion's master looked at him, and for one moment very briefly what was in his face was not calculation or grief or controlled fury. It was something much simpler. The specific look of someone seeing another person clearly, maybe for the first time, and finding the view both better and more alarming than they'd expected. "Be careful," Snape said. It came out differently than Harry thought he'd intended, less like an instruction, more like something he couldn't stop himself from meaning. "I will," Harry said. He stood to leave. He was at the door when Snape said, without looking up from the desk, "Potter, the text Flitwick has left for you at the library desk, Resonance and Intent, a Theory of Nonverbal Magic. Read it, particularly Chapter 7. Harry turned. "You recommended it." "I suggested the topic to Phileas." "I did not suggest your name." A pause. "Chapter 7, he said again. Harry went back to the library. He collected the book from the front desk where Flitwick had left it, a slim volume, old, smelling like the specific age of something that had been opened carefully many times. He sat down at Hermione's table where she was already entrenched in 3 simultaneous texts and opened to Chapter 7. It was titled, "The Will as Structure, on Magic that Precedes Wands." He read it twice before lunch. Halloween came and went and November arrived and the castle shifted again, colder, quieter, the mornings dark until almost 8. Harry practiced. He studied. He sat with his friends in the evenings and did the ordinary work of being 11, which he found he genuinely liked. The ordinariness of it, the way homework and chess games and badly made exploding snap decks could exist in the same life as fire in his palm and dark things behind locked doors. He was not pretending. That was the thing. He was not performing normalcy while secretly being something else. He was both simultaneously, without conflict. Harry who loved Quidditch practice and also Harry who could see the architecture of an 800-year-old magical fortress. Harry who stayed up too late talking with Ron and also Harry who had sensed Voldemort's presence in a colleague's body since the first week of school. He was getting better at holding all of it at once. And then came the morning when he went to the mirror. He'd found it by accident, the cloak again, a midnight walk, a corridor he hadn't explored yet, and he almost walked past the room because the door was already open. He pushed it wider and found a high-ceilinged storage room, half full of covered furniture, and against the far wall, enormous and ornate and perfectly still, a mirror. Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. He translated it without trying. He didn't know when he'd learned it, the mystic art's inheritance again, the echo of 1,000 encounters with enchanted objects, and stood in the center of the room and looked into it. Most people the enchantment showed their deepest desire, their heart's most complete want, the specific shape of the hunger they'd lived with longest. He knew this without the inscription. He stood in front of it and waited to see his family, his parents, the things that had been taken from him before he was old enough to understand the loss. What he saw instead was himself. Not different, not older, not more powerful, not famous or celebrated or surrounded by people who loved him. Just himself. Alone in an empty space, hands at his sides, palms open. And from his hands, from his chest, from the air around him, light, pouring outward, not aggressive, not searching. Simply radiating the way a lantern radiates, the way a sun radiates, because it is the nature of light to move and to give and to illuminate everything within reach. He stood in front of the mirror for a long time. He was not sure if it was showing him desire. He thought maybe it was showing him something else, what he looked like from the outside of himself. What the fire in his chest looked like when it had nowhere to hide and nothing to prove and was simply purely what it was. He reached up and touched the glass. The reflection touched back. He stood there until the cold got into his bones, and then he turned around and walked back through the dark castle with his hands in his pockets and the echo of the reflection behind his eyes. And when he got back to the dormitory, he lay awake for a while listening to the night sounds of the castle and thinking about what it meant to want something you already were. Eventually he slept. Outside the window, the November dark was complete and deep, and the mountains sat in it without apology, and the castle breathed. Chapter 4. The game beneath the game. The Quidditch pitch on a November morning was the coldest place Harry had ever willingly been, and he went back to it every single time. There was something about the air at height that the rest of his life didn't have, a clarity, a cleanness, the specific quality of being far enough above everything that the noise dropped away, and the only inputs that mattered were wind and speed, and the spatial geometry of where everything was relative to where he needed to be. He'd been waking up at 6 most mornings and going up alone before breakfast, before Wood's scheduled practices, before the castle properly stirred. Just him and the broom and the dark shape of the mountains against the lightning sky. He was doing that now, November 14th, when Wood arrived at the pitch at 7:15 instead of the scheduled 8 and found Harry already up, not doing drills, not running patterns, just hovering at about 200 feet with his eyes closed. Wood watched him for a minute, then he cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Potter, what are you doing?" Harry opened his eyes and came down in one smooth arc. "Mapping the pitch." Wood stared at him. "With your eyes closed." "Better that way." Harry landed and shook the cold out of his hands. "The air pressure shifts when a body moves through it. I can read where people are by the displacement." A pause. "That's," Wood started. "Useful," Harry said. "I was going to say absolutely mental," Wood said, "but also useful. Could you read the bludgers that way?" "Probably. Haven't tested it in match conditions." Wood pulled out a notebook. He had strong feelings about notebooks. Harry had discovered the entire Gryffindor Quidditch strategy for the year was in there, in handwriting so intense it had occasionally gone through to the next page. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we're adding that to the Slytherin game plan we have." He counted on his fingers. 3 weeks. 2.5, Harry said. 2.5. Wood wrote something down. 2.5 weeks before the first match and my seeker can navigate blind. I feel genuinely good about this. Don't feel too good, Harry said. I haven't played in a real match. Right, yes, Wood uncapped his pen again. We should probably address that. The week before the match had its own weather system, a specific pressure front of nervous energy that moved through the Gryffindor Tower and affected everyone within range. The team was in the changing rooms every evening. Wood's pre-practice speeches were becoming more elaborate. The twins had developed a habit of appearing at Harry's shoulder at odd moments to deliver unsolicited scouting reports about Slytherin's beaters with the enthusiasm of people who enjoyed this rather too much. "Bull hits left," Fred said, materializing beside Harry at breakfast on Monday. "Always left," George confirmed, appearing on his other side from nowhere in particular. "It's a psychological tic. His right arm's actually stronger, but he never trusts it." Harry poured himself some tea. "How do you know that?" "We've been studying Slytherin," Fred said, with the tone of someone describing a perfectly normal hobby. "Since third year," George said. "We have charts," Fred said. Harry looked between them. They grinned back, synchronized in the way that always made Harry feel like he was seeing a single thing from 2 angles simultaneously. "I appreciate the charts," he said. "Try to stay in your seats during the match." "We make no promises," they said together. The Slytherin team, Harry had gathered from Wood's comprehensive briefings, was larger, older, and equipped with the newest Nimbus 2000s that Marcus Flint's father had apparently donated to the school in the autumn with what everyone agreed was spectacular coincidence. It was a team built on physical intimidation and a particular brand of grinding defensive play that had won Slytherin the Quidditch Cup 3 of the last 4 years. Harry had watched them practice once, from high enough that they couldn't see him, and assessed them with the clean analytical distance of his new perception. They were good. Not extraordinary. Flint was a strong captain with no imagination, which meant the plays were reliable but readable. But they were experienced and they were ruthless, and 3 of them were large enough that a bludger hit wouldn't slow them down. The seeker was a tall 6th-year named Terrence Higgs who had excellent reflexes and a patience Harry respected. He wasn't concerned. He was preparing, which was different. The night before the match, he sat in the common room after everyone else had gone to bed and ran through it in his mind, not the Quidditch strategy, but the deeper check he'd been making every night for 3 weeks. The state of things. Quirrell, the 3rd floor, the stone. He mapped it the way he mapped the pitch, with his eyes metaphorically closed, reading the pressure of events against each other. Quirrell's cold signature had been quieter since Halloween. Restrained. Whatever attempt had been made that night had failed, probably in the face of whatever guardian was in that room, and in the aftermath there'd been a period of recalibration. Harry knew this the way he knew most things now, not through direct evidence but through the quality of the silences around the evidence. The way Quirrell taught class with slightly more effort in the performance. The way the cold signature had pulled inward, hoarding itself. It was waiting for the right moment. Harry was fairly certain the right moment wouldn't look like a troll again. It would look like something more personal, something more surgical. Whatever war, Quirrell had been around for a long time and was learning from its mistakes. He was watching. He was ready. He was also going to sleep because he had a Quidditch match at 11. The morning of the match, Hermione appeared in the common room at 8:30 with her hair doing several things at once and a piece of toast in her hand and the expression of someone who has been awake longer than was wise. "I've been thinking," she said. "Reassuring," Ron said from the armchair. "About the protective enchantments on the 3rd floor. Specifically the one beneath the giant dog, which I've been cross-referencing with known containment configurations, and I think there are at least 3 more layers beneath the one Harry felt." "Hermione," Harry said. He was in the process of eating a full breakfast on the basis that competitive flying on an empty stomach was ill-advised. "I have a match in 3 hours." She sat down. "Right, yes, after the match." "After the match," he agreed. She ate her toast and looked at him with the focused energy of someone making a visible effort to be here rather than in a research problem. Are you nervous? Number, she squinted. At all. I'm paying attention, Harry said. That's different from nervous. Ron, who had been listening with his chin on his hand, said, I'd be nervous. You're not playing, Harry pointed out. I'd be nervous watching, Ron said, which is arguably worse. Harry looked at him. Ron looked back, open and genuine and in the full middle of meaning it, and Harry thought, this is what it's like to have people who are afraid for you because they care rather than afraid of you because you're strange. I'll be fine, he said. I know, Ron said. Doesn't stop it. Harry smiled at that genuinely and went back to his breakfast. The stands were full. The entire school apparently treated Gryffindor-Slytherin as an occasion. There were banners, several of which had been enchanted to move, and the noise from 3,000 students in an outdoor stadium in cold Scottish November air was a physical thing, pushing against the eardrums. Harry stood with the team in the changing room and listened to Wood's final speech and found himself in a clean, quiet space inside all the noise, not distance, not disconnection, just stillness. He felt the pitch before he stepped onto it. Felt the air, its currents and pockets, and the specific way the morning cold had stratified warm band at 30 feet, sharp drop at 60, the turbulence above the east posts that he'd been monitoring since October. He knew where the sun was relative to the Slytherin Seeker's sightline. He knew the wind was coming from the northwest at about 12 miles an hour and would push center pitch slightly east. He walked onto the pitch and the noise went up and he looked up into the stands without searching for anyone in particular, and found Hermione and Ron anyway because they were the loudest thing in the Gryffindor section, and Hermione had apparently made a banner that said Potter, Seeker in letters that shifted color, which was impressive and slightly mortifying. He looked away before he smiled too obviously. Hooch blew the whistle. The balls released. Harry went up. The match had a rhythm he'd read in Wood's notebooks. The chasers engaging, the bludgers finding their trajectories, the crowd noise shifting to track the quaffle. Harry went to altitude and let himself orient. He wasn't looking for the snitch yet, not for the first 5 minutes. He was reading the entire pitch at once, every player's position, their movement patterns, the bludger trajectories, Higgs across the pitch doing the same job less efficiently because he was relying on eyes alone. He felt it at the 7-minute mark, not saw felt. A disturbance in the air at about 40 feet northeast of center, moving in the slightly erratic figure-8 pattern of a snitch trying to look like it wasn't a snitch. It had a magical signature, small and quick, the little humming charm work of its wings, and it was 40 feet down and 60 feet east, and Higgs hadn't found it yet. Harry didn't move. He had a theory, which was that the fastest way to lose a snitch was to go for it before you were certain of its trajectory. Instead, he maintained position, kept Higgs in peripheral awareness, and let the snitch move through 3 more seconds of its pattern while he mapped where it was going. Then he went. He didn't go directly for the snitch. He went for where the snitch was going to be in approximately 4 seconds, which was a different and much more efficient destination. The broom responded to him the way it always did, instantly, cleanly, like an extension of intent rather than an object being operated. He hit the air pocket above the east posts and adjusted for it without conscious thought, a half-second lean that corrected his angle, and his hand was open at exactly the right point in space at exactly the right moment. The snitch flew into it. He closed his fingers. The match had been running for 11 minutes. The noise from the Gryffindor stands was extraordinary. He looked at the snitch in his hand, a small golden thing. Wings folded now, vibrating faintly against his palm, and came down from altitude slowly, not dramatically, just at the pace of someone with no particular reason to hurry. Higgs, across the pitch, looked at Harry with the specific expression of someone trying to figure out what had just happened to them. Harry held the snitch up so Hooch could confirm, and the whistle blew and the scoreboard updated, and from the stands the Weasley twins made a noise that could probably be heard from the next county. It was in the cooling down period, when Harry was coming in toward the edge of the pitch, that he felt it. It hit him between the shoulder blades like a hand, except there was no hand. A sudden intense pressure of wrongness, cold and targeted, threading into the basic magic of his broom. Not a confundus, not a summoning charm, not anything with a clean wizarding signature. This was older than that, and it was aimed at him specifically, reaching into the enchantments of his broom with surgical precision and unraveling the stability charm at the base. The broom bucked. Harry held on and did not fall because the spatial instincts he'd been developing since September fired before any conscious response and adjusted his weight and grip without him having to think about it. He felt the broom trying to throw him, and he redirected the force, not through the broom but around it, a quick, precise thing. The mystic arts working beside the wizarding magic the way Snape's book had described in Chapter 7, 2 systems complementing each other. He kept his seat. He also tracked the curse back to its source. That was the other thing the instincts did. When something hostile connected with him, he could read the signature of it backward, follow it to its origin the way you follow a rope to find the hand that's holding it. The signature was cold, patient, very old. Quirrell was standing in the staff section of the stands. Harry kept his face still. He completed his descent, landed cleanly, let the team mob him in the usual chaos of a win. George actually lifted him off the ground briefly, which was an experience. And through all of it he kept one part of his attention on the signature of the curse, feeling it withdraw as Quirrell realized it hadn't worked, pulling back and going quiet again with the specific economy of something that doesn't waste energy on pointless effort. Hermione and Ron reached him at the edge of the pitch through the crowd. Hermione's face was sharp and still. "Something happened up there," she said. "Jinx on the broom," Harry said, not quietly. He didn't need to be quiet about it. "Someone tried to throw me." Ron's face had gone through several colors. During the match, in front of everyone, brazen, Harry agreed, also failed. He looked between them. It was Quirrell. Ron made a sound. "You're sure?" Hermione said. "I followed the signature back to him." Harry glanced at the staff section, which was emptying out now, teachers heading back toward the castle. Quirrell was gone already. "He tried to curse me off my broom in front of 3,000 people. Which means he's escalating," Hermione said. "Which means he's getting impatient," Harry corrected. "Escalating would be if he was gaining ground. He's not, he's desperate." Ron looked at the space where the staff section had been. "We need to tell Dumbledore." "We need to think about what to tell Dumbledore," Harry said. A pause. Ron looked at him. "There's a difference." "Dumbledore knows Quirrell is compromised," Harry said. "He'd worked this out over the last 3 weeks, fitting it together. He's known since before term started, I think. Why else put the stone here in a school if not because this was the safest place? He put 11 layers of protection around it and chose the people who laid each one carefully. He's been managing the situation." He paused. "Managing it without telling anyone, without involving anyone who wasn't his to deploy, me included." Hermione's expression was doing something complicated. "You're saying he's been keeping us in the dark deliberately?" "He's been keeping everyone in the dark deliberately," Harry said, "because his plan for protecting the stone is also his plan for dealing with Quirrell, and both of those plans presumably involve a specific sequence of events that he's arranged." He looked toward the castle. "And I need to decide if I'm in his sequence or my own." The wind had picked up off the lake. The stands were emptying around them, the happy post-match noise of the Gryffindor crowd drifting toward the castle in fragments. Ron stood beside Harry and Hermione and said nothing for a moment, which with Ron usually meant he was thinking something real. "The thing is," Ron said, "Dumbledore's plans are good. Like historically objectively good. My dad talks about him like he's the whole reason Voldemort failed last time and all the Order people think he's very powerful and he's very smart," Harry agreed. "And he's also arranged everything around the idea that he's the one protecting the stone, that his 11 layers of enchantment are the thing standing between Voldemort and immortality." Harry looked at his hands. "He hasn't accounted for me." A pause. "Right," Ron said slowly, "because he didn't know you were whatever you are when he set this up." "He's started to know," Harry said. "He's been watching me since September 1st, but he still doesn't know the full shape of it." He closed his hands, opened them again, "which means his plan has a gap he hasn't accounted for, and Quirrell just tried to kill me in front of 3,000 witnesses because he's running out of patience." He looked at Hermione. "After the match, you said," she straightened slightly. "I've identified all 11 protective layers," she said. "Based on your description of the magical signatures, the known capabilities of the teachers, and some educated reasoning about what each person would have been asked to contribute." She held up a finger. "Fluffy, the dog, is Hagrid's. Something about a devil's snare below, that's Professor Sprout. A key-finding challenge, probably Flitwick enchanted keys. A chessboard, which is almost certainly McGonagall's given her history with the game. A troll," she paused, "which we've already encountered technically." "What comes after?" Harry asked. "Logic," she said. "A potions puzzle, Snape's signature without question, and then the final chamber, the stone itself." She looked at him. "Dumbledore's. Can you solve the logic puzzle?" "Already did," she said, 3 nights ago in my head. It's good, it would stop most people, but it's solvable if you think clearly." Harry nodded. "The chess." Ron, Hermione, and Harry said simultaneously. Ron blinked. "Me? You're the best chess player in the school," Harry said. "You beat the 4th-year champion last week." "That's regular chess," Ron said. "Wizard chess is the same principles," Harry said. "Different scale." Ron absorbed this. Something moved across his face that was not quite fear and not quite willingness and landed somewhere between them, which was exactly where courage usually lived. "Right," he said. "Okay, right." A beat. "Why are we talking about this like we're going to actually?" "We're preparing," Harry said. "Not planning, preparing, there's a difference." "You keep saying that," Ron said. "Because it keeps being true." Harry looked at the castle. "We're not going down there tonight, we're not going down there until we have to, but I want to know the path before I need to walk it." Hermione pulled her jacket tighter against the wind. "And Quirrell tonight? We don't confront him," Harry said. "We watch. If he makes a move toward the corridor, we know before the teachers do and we make a decision then." How do we know before the teachers? Ron said. Harry looked at him. Because I can feel him from halfway across the castle. Another pause. Right, Ron said again. He had a specific tone for this, the one where he was accepting something that would have been completely absurd 2 months ago and just adding it to the growing list of things that were apparently normal now. It was, Harry thought, one of Ron's genuinely underrated qualities. Okay, brilliant, so we eat dinner, we go to bed, and if you know who starts moving through the castle, you'll feel it. I'll feel it, Harry confirmed. And then what? And then I'll wake you up, Harry said. He started walking toward the castle. After a moment, Ron and Hermione fell into step beside him, one on each side, and they went up from the pitch in the thin November sun with the lake at their backs. 2 weeks passed, exams were coming. December had shown up with serious intent, the kind of cold that lived inside the castle walls despite every warming charm, making the staircases feel like outdoor spaces and the dormitories into something you were grateful for. The grounds were hard with frost. The lake steamed at the edges in the mornings. Hagrid had put enormous fur earmuffs on all the flobberworms, which Hermione said was technically unnecessary but kind. Harry studied. He genuinely liked studying, not the performance of it, not the compliance, but the actual thing. Sitting with a problem until it gave up its structure, following a thread of logic through a text until the logic resolved into understanding. He and Hermione had established a study rhythm that worked for both of them: parallel silence, occasional questions, brutal honest feedback on each other's essay drafts that Ron called watching a very polite argument and declined to involve himself in. He was also quietly practicing, not just the mystic arts, though he was pushing those further, testing what he could do with space and force and light and the raw directness of magic that didn't need a framework. He was also practicing wizarding magic with more intentionality than the curriculum demanded, working through the second and third year spell lists on his own, understanding not just the mechanics but the why of each one, the underlying magical principle that the incantation was a shorthand for. He wanted both systems running fluently. He wanted no gaps between them. He was in the library on a Thursday evening in early December when Dumbledore sat down across from him. Not metaphorically. The headmaster simply appeared in the chair opposite Harry's table, robes settling, silver beard arranged, and set his hands on the table and looked at Harry with those very still blue eyes. Harry put his quill down and looked back. "Good evening, Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor," Harry said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," Harry said pleasantly, "but I don't mind." The corners of Dumbledore's eyes did something, almost a smile. "You know, most students become somewhat," he chose his word carefully, "affected when the headmaster appears at their study table. Should I be?" "Not necessarily." Dumbledore looked at the books in front of Harry, the curriculum text, the charms theory Flitwick had recommended, and underneath that, barely visible, a slim volume Harry had found in the restricted section under theoretical frameworks, non-standard magic. Dumbledore's gaze rested on the spine of the last one for just a moment. "How are you finding your first term?" "Interesting," Harry said. "Interesting," Dumbledore repeated as if tasting the word. "Not challenging." "Not overwhelming." "Interesting," Harry said again. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Harry had come to understand, a quality of patience that was not the cold patience of Voldemort's signature. It was warm, deep, the patience of someone who had lived long enough to trust that time would produce what was needed. It was also, Harry thought, the patience of someone who was used to being the most informed person in any given room and had built his strategies on the security of that. "You've been watching Professor Quirrell," Dumbledore said. It wasn't a question. "Have I?" Harry said. "You have," Dumbledore said, with the gentle certainty of someone stating arithmetic. "I've been watching you watch him. You're subtle, more subtle than I expected, but you've been doing it since September." He tilted his head. "What have you noticed?" Harry looked at him. The fire in his chest was steady and even and entirely unimpressed by the weight of Dumbledore's expectation. "Two magical signatures in one body," he said. "The second one is cold, old, patient. It's the thing that killed my parents." The library was very quiet. Madame Pince was somewhere in the stacks. Distant whispered conversations from other tables. Dumbledore's face did something very controlled and very precise that Harry suspected most people would have misread as mere thoughtfulness. What it actually was, Harry thought, was genuine recalibration. The headmaster had not expected Harry to say it that plainly in those words with that tone. "You can perceive this," Dumbledore said. "I can perceive a great many things," Harry said. "The stone, for instance, what's protecting it? The fact that Quirrell tried to jinx me off my broom 3 weeks ago and you've done nothing publicly visible about it because any visible response would tip your hand." He paused. "He tried again 2 days ago. Smaller, a distraction attempt, nothing that worked." Dumbledore's stillness had taken on a different quality. It was not the stillness of someone who was comfortable. It was the stillness of someone who had just encountered the edge of the map they were using. "Harry," he said very carefully, "how long have you been able to do this?" "Since September 1st. And the nature of it, this perception, this ability to, he stopped, started again, and Harry thought it was probably rare for Dumbledore to stop and start. Something changed on the 1st of September. Someone gave me something, Harry said. I don't know his name. I know he was the best there was at what he did, and he was dying, and he didn't want it to disappear. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened the day I entered the wizarding world. I think he was looking for someone and I fit what he was looking for. Dumbledore sat with that for a long time. You're not frightened, he said. It was almost wondering. Of what? Harry said honestly. Of any of it, of what you are, of what's in that corridor, of… He paused. When I was your age, I would have been frightened. You were trying to be Albus Dumbledore, Harry said. That's a lot to carry. He looked at his books. I'm just trying to be Harry. Another long silence. I owe you an explanation, Dumbledore said quietly. You owe me the truth, Harry said. The explanation is up to you. Dumbledore looked at him, and it was the first time Harry had seen something like wonder in the old man's face, free of strategy or calculation. Just genuine surprise at the thing sitting across the table from him. The stone is Nicholas Flamel's, he said. It was in Gringotts until July when my concerns about its safety became acute. Professor Quirrell, or the being currently using Professor Quirrell, has wanted it since last year. The protection I've built around it is significant. 11 layers, Harry said. 11 layers, Dumbledore confirmed. Each one was designed to stop someone coming through, including, if necessary, someone of considerable ability. A pause. I had not designed them with you in mind. No, Harry said, you designed them with yourself in mind, the last layer. Dumbledore said nothing. I'm not criticizing the design, Harry said. It's a good design, but Quirrell is out of patience. He's going to make a serious attempt soon, not a distraction, not a jinx during Quidditch, a direct run at it. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. And when he does, you need to be here. I am always here, Dumbledore said. He'll try when you're not, Harry said. He's been watching your patterns. He knows when you're occupied. Whatever he's planning, the timing will be chosen specifically to find the window where you're furthest from the corridor. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'll feel him move before anyone else does. A pause. And what will you do, Dumbledore said, when you feel him move? Harry looked at the slim restricted section volume on the table in front of him. Then he looked back at the headmaster. I'll make a decision, he said. Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. The library hummed around them with its bookish, specific peace. You are not at all what I expected, Dumbledore said eventually. What did you expect? Harry asked. A child, Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that was honest in a way his usual tone wasn't, something underneath the weight of the headmaster, the warm, avuncular performance of it. Just a man who had been carrying things for a very long time and had just discovered someone else in the room with him. I expected someone who would need protecting, someone I would need to shelter until the time was right. He looked at his hands. I have been operating, I confess, on a model that may require revision. Probably, Harry said, not unkindly. Dumbledore looked at him one more time and then stood, smoothing his robes. I will be in my office, he said. If you need to reach me quickly, the gargoyle knows the password. A pause. It is currently sherbet lemon, he said, with the tone of someone who understood the absurdity and had no intention of changing it. Though I suspect you could find me without it. Probably, Harry said again. Dumbledore left. Harry sat for a moment in the quiet, looking at the space where the headmaster had been. Then he picked up his quill and went back to work. The chess set appeared in the common room on a Tuesday, not the school's chess set. But the set Ron's older brother Percy had left behind when he'd been promoted to head boy and no longer needed the practice table. It was wizard chess, the pieces opinionated and occasionally rude, and Ron sat down at it every evening with the focused intensity of someone preparing for something specific while pretending to be doing something casual. Hermione watched him practice. Harry watched him too. The game had a quality under Ron's hands that it didn't have under anyone else's, not just tactics, which Ron understood intuitively and deeply, but feel. He played chess the way Harry flew, with a spatial awareness that went beyond calculation into something closer to instinct, reading the board as a living thing rather than a static problem. He lost pieces deliberately to set up positions 3 moves ahead. He sacrificed with the unsentimental precision of someone who understood that the king was worth any cost. You're very good at this, Hermione told him one night, watching him dismantle an elaborate defense he'd built for himself. I know, Ron said. He didn't say it with arrogance. He said it the way Harry said, I can feel the pitch matter-of-factly as simple information. It's the one thing. He moved a knight. Everything else, Hermione, you're better than me at everything else. Don't pretend you're not. It's fine. I've made my peace, but this one thing I know. Hermione looked at him for a moment. That's not true. You know people. You know how to make people feel like themselves. Ron looked up from the board. You do, she said firmly in the tone that meant she'd considered it and wasn't changing her position. It's a different kind of intelligence and it matters. Ron looked back at the board. Right, he said quietly and moved another piece. Harry caught the small shift in Ron's face, something that had been slightly compressed releasing a little, and looked away to give it privacy. That was the night Harry decided, fully and without reservation, that these two people were his. The cold signature moved on a Thursday. Harry felt it at 2 in the morning, sitting up in bed instantly, out of sleep without transition the way he'd learned to wake since September, the fire in his chest blazing with an urgency that had nothing personal in it, just pure information. Something was moving through the castle, something cold and purposeful and no longer bothering to be patient. He was in Ron's room in 4 seconds. Get up. Ron made the specific sound of someone coming out of deep sleep and finding Harry Potter standing over him. He sat up without complaint. Harry had discovered, someone who woke quickly in a crisis, the Weasley family's particular gift for functional chaos having produced in him the ability to be immediately useful when usefulness was required. Now. Hermione was already in the common room when they got downstairs, dressed, books in her bag. She looked up when they came down the stairs. I heard you get up, she said to Harry. Is it? He's moving, Harry said. Fast. Toward the 3rd floor they went. Harry wore the invisibility cloak, all 3 of them under it, which was a tighter fit than was strictly comfortable. But the alternative was being caught by Filch or Peeves in the middle of the night corridors, which would waste time they didn't have. He led them through the castle by feel, tracking Quirrell's signature the way you track a sound, not with ears, but with the particular spatial sense that had been growing in him since September, sharp now, accurate to within a few feet. Quirrell had a head start. Not a large one. They reached the 3rd floor corridor just behind him. The door was open. Not just unlocked, open, which meant the locking hexes and containment charms had been dealt with, which meant Quirrell, the cold thing in Quirrell, was more capable than a locked door, which Harry filed away as important. From beyond the door came the sound of something enormous and not particularly happy. Harry pulled the cloak off them. No point now. Stay close, he said, and stepped through the door. The dog was the size of a small house. 3 heads, 6 eyes, all currently focused on the figure pressed against the far wall, Quirrell, who had a small harp in his hands playing itself. And the dog was half asleep but fighting it, one head drooping and then jerking back up. Harry looked at it and looked at the enchantment on the trapdoor at its feet, which was not contained anymore, which was open. Quirrell heard them. He turned. The face under the turban was Quirrell's, pale, sweating, eyes too wide, but what looked at Harry through it was not Quirrell. It was the cold signature in full, stripped of its patience now, looking at Harry with a recognition that was very old and very specific. You, it seemed to say, though Quirrell's mouth said nothing. Harry looked back at it without flinching. Professor, he said, conversationally, like they'd met in the corridor. Long night, the Quirrell face contorted, the harp faltered, the dogs' heads began to lift. Get to the trapdoor, Harry said to Ron and Hermione, and then he stepped fully into the room. Quirrell raised his wand. The curse that came off it was not anything first years learned in class. It was the specific cold purple of something genuinely harmful, aimed at Harry's chest with the precision of something that had been doing this for a very long time. Harry moved. Not dramatically, 3 inches to the left, the precise 3 inches that took him out of the curse's path, because the instinct to read incoming force and avoid it was so deeply embedded now that doing it took less effort than stepping around a puddle. The curse hit the wall. Stone cracked. The dog lurched upright, all 3 heads awake and furious, and turned toward Quirrell. Harry looked at the dog. He reached out, not physically, just with his attention, with the spatial sense that felt the room, and pressed something specific and careful into the ambient magic of the space. Not a spell. A suggestion, the way you suggest to a room that it is comfortable, the way a fireplace suggests that a room is warm. The dog felt it, all 3 heads swinging toward Harry instead of Quirrell, and something in its enormous, overextended magical instinct said, safe. The dog sat down. Quirrell stared at the dog. Then at Harry. The trapdoor, Harry said without turning his head to Ron and Hermione. He heard them moving. He kept his eyes on Quirrell. The cold signature was doing something he hadn't felt before. It was pulling harder against Quirrell's skin, like a thing pressed too long against a wall that was finally giving way. Quirrell's hands were shaking. His face was doing something that was trying very hard to be calm and had entirely failed. You've been trying to get through here since September, Harry said. Not a challenge, an observation. First the troll, then my broom. You've been watching the patterns, looking for the right window. He tilted his head. I've been watching you watch. Quirrell's mouth opened. What came out wasn't his stammer. You, said the voice, and it was not Quirrell's voice, dry and thin and carrying the specific quality of something that had lost its body and not yet found its way back to one. You are not what you were meant to be. No, Harry agreed, I'm not. You were meant to be a dead child. I was, Harry said. Fortunately, plans change. The cold signature surged. Quirrell raised the wand again, and Harry felt the curse before it came. Felt the intention the way you feel a door about to open before it opens, and he pushed back. Not fire, not force, he pushed back with the specific thing Strange had given him, the ability to read the structure of a magical attack and find its load-bearing point, the place where all the will behind it was concentrated, and he pressed that point with precision and certainty. The curse collapsed before it left the wand. It didn't just fail, it unraveled, the magical structure of it coming apart strand by strand in a half-second, and Quirrell staggered as the rebound hit him. From the trapdoor, Hermione called, "We're through, Harry." He didn't take his eyes off Quirrell. The cold signature was furious now, not panicking. It was too old and too controlled for panic, but furious in the way that something accustomed to winning furiously hated not winning. "This isn't the end," the voice said. "I know," Harry said. "Go." He said it simply, directly, with the full weight of the fire in his chest behind it, and what that felt like to Quirrell, to the thing wearing Quirrell, must have been something, because for 1 second the cold signature recoiled. Not from Harry. From what Harry was. From the thing he was carrying, the Sorcerer Supreme's inheritance, the fire that had been burning in his chest since the 1st of September. Quirrell pressed back against the wall. Harry turned and dropped through the trapdoor. The dark swallowed him, and below the next challenge waited, and the dog sat peacefully in the room above, and the castle held its breath. Chapter 5, Heir of Eternity. The fall was longer than it should have been. Harry dropped through the dark and felt the devil's snare reach for him before he landed. The soft, urgent tendrils of it, alive and curious and immediately possessive, wrapping around his wrists and ankles the moment he made contact. He felt Hermione shout something to Ron about relaxing into it. He felt Ron make a sound that suggested relaxing into something trying to strangle him was not coming naturally. Harry looked at the plant around his arms. He looked at it the way he looked at everything now, reading its structure, the enchantment woven into its instinct that made it seek out struggling things, the specific botanical magic that was Professor Sprout's signature as clearly as a fingerprint. Then he exhaled slowly, completely still, and the snare loosened. Not because he'd relaxed, because he'd pushed something outward through the contact point, a very small, very warm thing, and the plant had felt it and reassessed. He dropped the rest of the way to the floor. Ron and Hermione landed beside him a moment later, Ron with the breathless energy of someone who had successfully fought his instincts, Hermione with the precision of someone who had done exactly what the theory said to do. They straightened up, looked around. The room was high-ceilinged and damp and smelled like earth, lit by some ambient glow that had no visible source. The devil's snare receded back toward the trapdoor above them, settling. Ahead of them, a door. "You're not even breathing hard," Ron said to Harry. "I'm fine," Harry said. "The plant let go of you in about 2 seconds. I asked nicely." Ron looked at him, looked at Hermione, looked back at Harry. "Right," he said, and opened the door. The key room was Flitwick's work. Harry felt his teacher's signature in the enchantment the moment he stepped through, the precise, delighted quality of it, Flitwick's magic having the specific feel of someone who loved what they did and had done it a very long time. Hundreds of winged keys swarming at the ceiling like a metallic migration, and one old broomstick against the wall and a locked door at the far end. Ron went straight for the broom. Hermione had her wand out studying the keys, with the focused attention of someone speed-reading a dense text. Harry stood in the middle of the room and closed his eyes. The right key had Flitwick's signature on it more heavily than the rest, not just enchanted but chosen, marked, the specific one he designated as the match to the door's lock. Harry found it in 4 seconds. It was the old silver one with the slightly bent left wing that was hovering near the east corner of the ceiling, trying very unconvincingly to look like all the other keys. "East corner," Harry said. "Old silver one, bent left wing." Ron was already on the broom. He veered east and the keys scattered in alarm, and he made 2 passes that the keys successfully avoided. They were quick, and the bent wing was a feint, Harry realized, making it look slightly less mobile than it was, and then Harry made a small gesture with one hand and the key's movement stuttered. Just for a half second, just enough. Ron's hand closed around it. The door opened. "How did you do that?" Ron asked, landing. "With your hand." "Interrupted the enchantment," Harry said, like pressing pause. "On a flying magical key. They're small enchantments, easy to pause." Ron handed him the key. "You say that like it's nothing." "It's not nothing," Harry said. "I'm just getting better at it." He held the door. "Come on." McGonagall's chess set was enormous. They stood at the edge of the board and looked at it, and Harry felt Ron go quiet in the way he went quiet when he was thinking properly, not the quiet of uncertainty but the quiet of complete engagement, the specific internal stillness of a mind doing what it was built for. The pieces were stone and they were large and they had the quality of things that knew what they were for. The white pieces stood waiting on their side. The black pieces were already set, blocking the far door. "We have to play our way through," Hermione said. "Yeah," Ron said. He was walking the edge of the board, looking at the black pieces' configuration with his hands behind his back. "I see it." He turned around. "Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, you're a castle. I'm the knight." "You should be king," Hermione said. "Knight," Ron said with quiet finality. "I need to be a piece that can move the way I need to move." He turned back to the board. This is going to take about 9 moves, maybe 10. He glanced at Harry. Some of these pieces don't want to take orders from an 11-year-old. Will they listen? Harry asked. Ron's chin lifted. They'll listen. Harry moved to his square. The stone bishop he replaced stepped aside with something between reluctance and dignity. The board thrummed under his feet, a whole-body sensation, the magical scale of it, McGonagall's signature humming through every piece with the quality of a master strategist who took the game seriously in a way that had nothing to do with points or glory. Ron opened. It was something to watch. Harry played his positions when directed, moved when told, stayed put when staying was the play. But his attention was mostly on Ron, who was doing something Harry recognized, had seen in his own flying and in Hermione's research and in Neville's hands in the greenhouse. He was doing the thing where the gap between who you are and what you're capable of collapses entirely, and what's left is pure function, pure self, no space between intention and action. Ron called the moves. The stone pieces obeyed. The black pieces fought back with the cold efficiency of enchanted opposition, and twice they took pieces that Ron had already decided to give them. He sacrificed without hesitation. He gave up the castle, Hermione's square, stepping aside for a Black Knight in move 7, and Harry heard Hermione inhale, and Ron said, "Trust me," without looking at her, and she stepped off the board. Move 8, move 9. Checkmate on 10, Ron said. He was on his knight centerboard surrounded. He looked at Harry and Hermione at the board's edge. "I've got to stay." Harry crossed the board to him in 6 steps. Ron's face was doing something careful, the face of someone who had decided on a thing and didn't want to make it into more than it was. "You don't have to," Harry started. "Yeah, I do," Ron said. "The position requires it. If I don't take the queen, she takes you." He nodded toward the far door. "And you need to go through." He looked at Harry steadily. "Go, whatever's through there, it needs to be you." Harry looked at his friend, 10 moves into a masterclass that a 17-year-old strategist would have been proud of, standing in the center of it ready to be taken by the queen so the path was clear, and felt something he didn't have a word for yet, something warm and specific and nothing to do with the fire in his chest. "You're extraordinary," Harry told him, and meant it without reservation. Ron went slightly red. "Go," he said. "And Harry." He waited until Harry met his eyes. "Don't mess about in there." "When do I ever mess about?" "September 1st through today," Ron said with perfect accuracy. Harry almost laughed. Hermione was already at the door. He followed her through. The potions room was Snape's. 7 bottles on a table, a roll of parchment, a fire blocking the way forward, a wall of purple flame blocking the way back. Hermione unrolled the parchment and read it once. Harry watched her read it and read Snape's signature in the construction, the layered logic of it, the cold precision, the specific trap of the thing designed to stop someone who assumed brute force was an answer to every question. "It's solvable," Hermione said. She read it again, which was not because she needed to, but because she was making absolutely certain. "This one," she pointed at a bottle. Harry looked at it. He felt Snape's intention in it, the way you feel the authorship in a piece of writing, the specific quality of mind that had constructed this. The dark irony of a man who had spent his life being underestimated by people who assumed intelligence was proportional to popularity, building a test that rewarded clear thinking over power. "You're going back," Harry said to Hermione. She looked up from the parchment. "What? There's only enough potion here for one person to go forward," he said. "The bottle for going back is small. 2 people can't go through the same direction." He met her eyes. "Get Ron, get back to Gryffindor Tower, send an owl to Dumbledore. And if Dumbledore doesn't get here in time, then I'll handle it," Harry said. "Harry, Hermione." He said it quietly, not with command but with certainty, the same quality Ron had had when he'd called the moves on the chessboard. "I know what I'm walking into. I've known the shape of it for weeks. This is what I'm for." He picked up the potion for going forward. "You've done everything right tonight. You've done everything right since September. Go back." She looked at him for a long moment, really looked. The way she looked at things she was deciding were true, and then she did something neither of them had done yet because they'd known each other for 3 months and weren't quite the age where it was natural. She stepped forward and hugged him. Quick, fierce, gone before he could respond. "Don't die," she said with characteristic directness. "Wasn't planning on it," he said. She took the backward potion and stepped into the purple flame. Harry turned to the black fire ahead. He drank the potion, cold, clinical. Snape's magic settling into his blood with the specific efficiency of someone who had done potions for 40 years and didn't waste a single ingredient. He walked through the black fire. On the other side, the light changed. The final chamber was round and high and bare. And standing in the center of it, not at the mirror, already at the mirror, reflected in it, hand pressed against the glass, was not Quirrell. It was a man Harry had never seen and recognized immediately. Tall once. Probably handsome once, in the cold aristocratic way that photographs couldn't quite capture. Now the body was thin and wrong, the magic around it misshapen in the way of something that had been stretched too far too long. Not a proper form, not a full inhabitation, something between a parasite and a ghost wearing a parasite, layered inside Quirrell's body like something testing the limits of a container. Voldemort turned, not Quirrell turned. Not the stammer, not the performance, just the cold thing itself, fully surfaced now, wearing Quirrell's hands and voice but not bothering with the rest of the costume. The face that looked at Harry was wrong in a way that had nothing to do with physical features and everything to do with the signature behind it, ancient, controlled, brilliant in the specific way that brilliance becomes monstrous when it decides that other people are instruments. Harry Potter, Voldemort said through Quirrell's mouth. At last, Harry stood at the edge of the chamber and took a breath and looked at the man who had killed his parents. The fire in his chest was very steady, very clear. "I've been waiting for you to make your move," Harry said. "You took longer than I expected." Something moved in Quirrell's eyes, the cold thing behind them reading Harry, assessing and finding something it hadn't calculated for. "You came through my challenges," it said, "all of them. Your challenges, Dumbledore's challenges." Harry looked past Quirrell at the mirror. "You can't get it out of there." "Not yet," Voldemort said. The voice was patient, reasonable, the voice of someone who had explained things to lesser minds for a very long time and was very good at making the explaining sound like a favor. "But I will. The mirror gives the stone only to someone who wants it but not to use it. A small puzzle, manageable." A pause. "Unless you'd like to help me." "No," Harry said. "You haven't heard what I'm offering." "You killed my parents," Harry said. "Whatever you're offering, number, your parents made a choice," Voldemort said. It came out with the smooth quality of an argument that had been prepared. "They chose to stand in front of something they couldn't stop. Brave, certainly. Useless, certainly. Your mother," a pause, precise and deliberate. "Your mother had real power, real potential, wasted on sentiment." Harry said nothing. He felt the words try to land and felt them not land, the fire in his chest steady as bedrock. He was not immune to the grief. It was there, always there, the specific weight of losing something you never got to have, but Voldemort was trying to use it as a lever and Harry was simply not giving him the purchase. "You have something unprecedented," Voldemort said. The tone had shifted, dropped the manipulation, moved to something more direct, which was more honest and also more dangerous. "I can see it. I've been able to see it since the Quidditch match. What you're carrying, that's not wizarding magic. That's not even close to wizarding magic. That is something that should not exist in this world." He tilted Quirrell's head. "What are you, boy?" "I'm Harry Potter," Harry said. "And I'm what comes next." He moved. Not a dramatic lunge, he stepped forward and to the left simultaneously, reading the curse Voldemort sent at him before it fully left the wand. 3 inches of lateral movement that took him cleanly out of its path, the way stepping around a door takes no particular effort when you know the door is there. He kept moving, not running, not scrambling, just moving, reading the room with every step, tracking the physical position of Quirrell's body, the magical position of the signature inside it, the mirror behind them and the door behind him and every variable in between. Voldemort sent 3 more curses. Harry avoided all of them the same way, minimal movement, maximum precision, the mystic art's instinct for spatial reading stripping any element of surprise from attacks he could feel building before they came. On the 4th one he changed his approach. He reached out and caught the curse in the air, not with his hand, with his attention. He caught it the way he'd caught the snitch, reading where it was going to be and being there first, and he held it in the space between them, suspended, and he looked at Voldemort through it. "You're unraveling his body," Harry said. The curse hung in the air between them, frozen in its own structure. Quirrell's. "Every time you use his hands, every time you push his magic beyond what it was, you're burning through what he has." He looked at Quirrell's face, the real face underneath the cold signature, the one that was exhausted and far past fear and had been gone from itself for months. "He made a choice," Harry said. "A terrible one, but he made it." "How poetic," Voldemort said. "Let me go and he survives." "He doesn't survive either way," Harry said. "You've been in him too long." Voldemort's control cracked, just for a moment, just enough. What showed through wasn't rage. It was something more primal than rage. The specific fury of something that has calculated everything and found an uncalculated variable, something that had spent 50 years being the most powerful presence in every room it entered and had just found a room it didn't own. "You cannot stop me," it said. "I am Lord Voldemort. I have been alive for longer than your entire bloodline. You've been surviving," Harry said. "That's different." He released the suspended curse, not back at Quirrell, not anywhere dangerous. He unraveled it, broke its structure down strand by strand until there was nothing left of it but warm air. He felt Voldemort feel this and felt the response, shock, then something cold and adaptive, the intelligence behind it shifting strategy in real time. Voldemort went for the mirror. He moved fast, faster than Quirrell's borrowed body should have been able to move, the cold signature pushing past the body's limits with a ruthlessness that was genuinely alarming, and he reached the mirror in 2 strides and pressed Quirrell's hands against the glass and reached into the enchantment. Harry reached the mirror at the same moment. He didn't try to pull Quirrell back physically. He put his hand on the mirror's frame on the elaborate gilt edge of it, and he felt the enchantment, Dumbledore's enchantment, the final and most elegant layer, the one that understood human desire and used it with a precision that deserved genuine respect. The mirror gave the stone to those who wanted it but not to use it, who wanted it found, wanted it safe, wanted it in their pocket not for themselves but to keep it from someone else. Voldemort could not fulfill that condition. Whatever he desired, it was for himself, specifically, entirely, the way deep hunger is always specific and entire. Harry could. He let the fire in his chest come forward. Not aggressively, he didn't push it at Voldemort, didn't use it as a weapon. He simply let it be what it was, the full, unconstrained weight of the Sorcerer Supreme's inheritance, the oldest and most complete magical system he was aware of, brought to bear on one specific enchantment with one specific intent. I want this found. I want this safe. I want it nowhere near you. The mirror blazed. Not physically, no light, no sound, nothing a camera would have caught. But in the magical sense, the chamber was suddenly brilliant. The mirror's enchantment responding to the quality of Harry's want the way a key responds to a lock it was built for. And in his trouser pocket, with a weight that appeared from nowhere, something small and smooth and dense with centuries of careful power settled against his leg. The Philosopher's Stone. Voldemort felt it happen. The cold signature shrieked. There was no other word for what happened to it. The controlled patience ripping away entirely. A century of careful strategy overwhelmed in one instant by the specific fury of being denied, and Quirrell's body spun toward Harry and both of Quirrell's hands came up. Harry grabbed both of Quirrell's wrists. He hadn't planned to touch him. He'd known, from Snape's book and his own reading and the instincts he'd been developing since September, that the cold signature was hostile to things that carried warmth, that Voldemort's shredded, parasitic form was specifically vulnerable to what it was not. The fire in his chest was the opposite of what Voldemort was. He hadn't planned to use that as a weapon. But Quirrell had his wrists and the curses were coming from every direction at once, wordless and desperate, and Harry held on. The fire came up, not explosively. It moved through Harry's hands the way warmth moves through contact, through skin, through the connection between two people. And what it met on the other side was the cold signature of a thing that had no body of its own, that was using Quirrell's biology as borrowed infrastructure, that had nothing to put between itself and what Harry was carrying. Quirrell's skin began to blister where Harry held him. Harry watched it happen and felt something very complicated, not satisfaction, nothing as simple as that. Grief partly for Quirrell, who had made a terrible choice a long time ago, and was paying for it in every cell of his borrowed body. Clarity partly for knowing that there was no version of this where Quirrell walked away. And underneath those things, something resolute and clean and without apology, the knowledge that the man who had killed his parents was being unmade by the thing he'd tried to destroy 11 years ago, and Harry was going to hold on. Let go, Voldemort said. The voice was not calm anymore. Let go of me. I will make you. Make me what? Harry said. He held on. You came here to take something. You came here to get your body back, to get strong enough to finish what you started with my parents. His hands were warm. Quirrell was crumbling, the body beginning to dissolve at the points of contact, the cold signature thrashing inside it like something trying to get out. I know what you are. I can see the whole shape of you. There's not as much left as you think. I cannot die, the voice cracked on it. I have made myself permanent, Harry said. I know you made pieces of yourself permanent, clever. He held Quirrell's wrists and looked directly at the cold signature past Quirrell's face at the thing behind it. But a piece isn't the whole. And the rest of you, he pressed the fire forward, steady and deliberate and absolutely without cruelty. The rest of you is very tired. The cold signature raged. It surged against him, the full force of whatever Voldemort had left, every scrap of will and power that hadn't been split off and hidden, slamming against Harry the way a wave slams against a breakwater. Harry felt it hit and felt it break. Not because he was stronger, he honestly didn't know if he was stronger, and it didn't seem like the right question. Because the wave had been trying to destroy things for 50 years and the breakwater had been resting, and there was a difference between exhausted fury and quiet certainty that had nothing to do with magnitude of power. He held on. Quirrell's body collapsed. It happened fast. The dissolution moved up from Harry's hands. The skin, then what was beneath the skin, the body losing cohesion the way a sandcastle loses cohesion when the tide comes in. Except there was no tide here, only contact. Only the fire meeting its precise and total opposite. Quirrell's face went from expression to nothing in a matter of seconds. The cold signature tried to flee, tried to detach from the body the way it had presumably detached from Voldemort's own body 11 years ago, looking for something else to inhabit, something else to use. It found nothing. Harry was everywhere in the room. The fire in his chest had expanded to fill the available space without any decision on his part, It simply went where it needed to go, the Sorcerer Supreme's instinct for protecting a space functioning perfectly without being asked. The cold signature moved and met warmth, moved again and met warmth, made one final attempt to reach the door and met warmth, and made a sound that was not a sound that Harry heard with no ears and came apart. Not died. Harry didn't think Voldemort could die here, not entirely. Not while the pieces of himself he'd hidden elsewhere still existed in the world. But the part of him that had been in Quirrell, the hungry, fraying remnant that had spent a year wearing a frightened teacher, was gone, scattered, no longer coherent. Harry stood in the middle of the chamber with his hands at his sides and his chest steady and the Philosopher's Stone in his pocket. The remains of Quirrell's body were on the floor. He looked at them for a long moment. He thought about Quirrell, the choice he'd made in Albania, whatever desperation or ambition or simple fear had made him open a door he shouldn't have opened. He didn't forgive it. He didn't condemn it either. He just held the knowledge that a man had been in that body and the man was gone now, and that was a real thing that had happened and it deserved a moment of something. He gave it one. Then he put his hand in his pocket, felt the stone solid and warm against his palm, and sat down on the floor. He was tired. Not deeply tired, not hurt, not desperate, just the ordinary tired of someone who had done a significant thing and could now put it down. He sat on the cold stone floor of Dumbledore's final chamber and rested his back against the wall and looked at the mirror, which was looking back at him with its elaborate inscription, and waited. He was asleep when Dumbledore arrived. He hadn't planned to sleep, but the body had its own opinions, and the fire in his chest was doing the warm and settled thing it did when there was no immediate crisis, and the floor of the chamber was very still, and Harry went somewhere quiet for a while. He woke up in the hospital wing, white ceiling, the smell of potions and clean linen. Sunlight coming from the wrong angle for it to be the same night, which meant he'd slept through several hours at minimum. He turned his head and found Hermione asleep in a chair beside his bed, and Ron asleep in another chair beside hers, both of them in the specific uncomfortable position of people who had fallen asleep while waiting for someone and refused to go to a proper bed on principle. He looked at them for a while. Then he sat up carefully and found that he felt entirely fine. No pain. No residual magical depletion, which he'd half expected. Using the fire at that scale for that long was the most he'd ever pushed it, and he'd braced for some kind of cost. But there was nothing. The fire in his chest burned the same as always, steady, warm, the size it had always been, belonging to him completely. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Don't," said Madame Pomfrey from the other end of the ward without looking up. "You've been unconscious for 17 hours. Whatever you're planning can wait another 10 minutes. Harry put his legs back. Hermione stirred at the sound of Pomfrey's voice and sat up with the instant alertness of someone who had been waiting to be needed and didn't want to miss the cue. She looked at Harry. Something moved through her face, relief, sharp and unguarded, before she pulled it back to its usual register. "You slept through Dumbledore," she said. "He was here. For 3 hours. He sat beside your bed and waited for you to wake up and then had to leave for something to do with the ministry." She pushed her hair back. "He said he'd return." Ron had woken during this exchange and was doing a full inventory of Harry with his eyes, the way Ron looked at things he'd been worried about. "You look normal," he said finally. "I feel normal." "You fought Voldemort," Ron said, as though Harry might have forgotten. "I know. Last night, in the chamber, you physically grabbed Voldemort." "The part of him that was in Quirrell," Harry said. "He's not gone entirely. There are other pieces, but that part, he thought about it." "Yeah, that's gone." Ron sat back. He had the face of someone finishing a very long calculation. "Okay," he said. "Okay." A pause. "The chess pieces are fine, by the way. I asked Dumbledore. McGonagall's already repairing the board." Another pause. "I was taken by the Queen. I know you planned it that way." "I did." Ron said it with satisfaction, not pride, satisfaction, which was a better thing. She didn't see it coming. Very gratifying. Hermione passed Harry a glass of water from the bedside table. He drank it. She watched him drink it with the expression of someone who has several things they want to say and is deciding on order. "The stone," she said. "Dumbledore has it," Harry said. He'd handed it over when Dumbledore arrived, without discussion, without particular ceremony, taken it from his pocket and placed it in the headmaster's hands, and felt the right thing about that, which was a kind of relief. He didn't want the stone. He'd never wanted it. He'd wanted it not to be Voldemort's, and that condition was now satisfied. "He's sending it back to Flamel." Hermione nodded. This appeared to be what she'd expected. "And Quirrell?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "Gone," he said. "She didn't push it." She refilled his water glass and looked at her book and didn't ask him how he felt about that, which was exactly the right choice because he was still working out how he felt about it and didn't need to perform a conclusion he hadn't reached. Ron said, "The whole school knows something happened. Nobody knows what. There are 17 different theories circulating, my brothers tell me, and at least 3 of them are completely insane." "How insane?" Harry asked. "One of them involves you defeating a dragon." "There was no dragon." That's the most normal one, Ron said. Dumbledore came back that evening. The hospital wing had emptied out. Madame Pomfrey had very firmly sent Ron and Hermione to dinner with the expression of someone whose authority over who was and wasn't in her ward was absolute and non-negotiable. Harry was sitting up in bed, entirely alert, when the door opened and Dumbledore came through it. He looked tired. Not old tired, he always looked old. In the way great things look old, but specifically tired. The tiredness of someone who had spent 17 hours in conversation with people he found difficult and was not finished yet. He settled into the chair beside Harry's bed with less of the usual performance than Harry had seen from him, no particular arrangement of robes or expression, just a man sitting down. For a moment neither of them said anything. "You were asleep when I arrived," Dumbledore said. "I heard." "You had faced Voldemort and defeated him and you were asleep on the floor," Dumbledore said, and something in his voice was between exasperation and something else that he clearly wasn't entirely comfortable with. "Do you know how many people have faced Voldemort?" "And survived," Harry said. "A few, and beaten him," he tilted his head. "Before me, just you." Dumbledore was quiet. "And you didn't beat him," Harry said. "It wasn't cruel. It was accurate the way the things Harry said were usually accurate rather than careful. You fought him to standstills, you outmaneuvered him, but you never finished it." He looked at the headmaster. "Why not?" Another long pause. Dumbledore looked at his hands, large hands, scarred in a way Harry hadn't noticed before, the left one marked with something old that had the quality of deliberate damage taken rather than careless accident. "Because," Dumbledore said finally, "finishing things is more complicated than it sounds when you can see far enough ahead." He looked up. "I could see what defeating Voldemort would require. And some of what it would require was the kind of cost I was not willing to let others pay." "Me," Harry said. Dumbledore said nothing. "Whatever you planned for me," Harry said. "Whatever sequence you were running, the 11 layers and the specific people you chose and the way you let it go on all year watching how things developed, part of it was about me, what role I was going to play." He held the headmaster's gaze steadily. "You were going to let me face him eventually, on your timetable." "In your arrangement," Dumbledore's expression was very still and very old. "I had concerns," he said quietly, "about what facing Voldemort would cost a child. But you knew I'd have to." "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "Number, because you were afraid of what I'd do with the information," Harry said. "You looked at me on September 1st and saw something you didn't expect and you recalibrated and you kept watching and you still didn't tell me because you weren't certain yet how much to trust what I was becoming." He paused. "How close is that?" Dumbledore was quiet for what felt like a long time. Outside the hospital wing, the castle was beginning its evening sounds, the distant noise of dinner, the settling of stone, the particular chorus of a building that held 500 people and was alive enough to register all of them. "Very close," Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. He'd known it. It didn't make him angry. He'd processed the anger weeks ago in the library, examining it from all angles before letting it go, because carrying anger at a complicated man for doing complicated things was expensive, and he'd rather spend the energy on something useful. What remained was something clearer, a kind of directness. "I need you to tell me things," Harry said, "not everything." "I'm not asking for everything. I know you have information that isn't mine yet, that I'd need more context to use well. But I need you to not arrange things around me without consulting me." He looked at Dumbledore. "Because what happened last night, I went down there and I did what needed doing and the stone is safe and Quirrell is gone. And I did that in your arrangement, through your challenges with your enchantments around me. But I did it on my terms with my own judgment, and if I'd done it on yours it would have looked different." "Yes," Dumbledore said, "it would have." He looked at Harry with those very blue, very still eyes, and Harry thought that Dumbledore was very rarely surprised by people and was surprised now and was deciding what to do with it. "What you did in that chamber, you have given me several things to think about." "Good," Harry said. "Quirrell?" "I held on," Harry said. "I made a choice and I held on. He didn't suffer beyond what had already happened to him." He paused. "Voldemort isn't gone, I told you that. There are other pieces of him. I could feel the shape of what remained, like a map with parts missing. He'll come back eventually." "Yes," Dumbledore said, "he will." "Then we should prepare for that," Harry said, "together, not you arranging and me stumbling through your arrangement." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "You know more about him than anyone alive. I can see things you can't see. Between those two things, we might actually be ready," Dumbledore said quietly, not quickly, not as if it was easy. As if he was arriving at a decision that cost him something, the cost of a man who had been the most powerful thing in the room for 60 years acknowledging that the room had changed. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for making decisions about your life without asking your opinion of them." Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said, "you do." Dumbledore nodded slowly. He reached into his robes and set something on Harry's bedside table, a small tin of lemon sherbets. He did it with the air of someone who knew it was an insufficient gesture and was making it anyway, because some gestures mattered for their own sake. Harry looked at the tin, then at Dumbledore. "Thank you," he said, which covered the sherbet and the apology and the year and everything complicated underneath all of it. Dumbledore stood. He was not shuffling, he was upright, precise, more alive somehow than he'd looked when he came in, as if this conversation had given him something back rather than taken something out. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "Harry," he said, "what you are, the thing you carry, the inheritance you received on the 1st of September. I have spent 17 hours trying to understand it, and I confess I have failed." He turned back. "Will you tell me, at some point, what you understand of it?" Harry thought about the fire in his chest, the presence on the train, fading and exhausted and certain, the threads of magic that ran through everything he looked at, the library of instinct that had been building since September, Strange's knowledge becoming his own the way water becomes the shape of its container. "Yes," he said, "when I understand it better myself." Dumbledore looked at him for one more moment, the look of someone who has spent a lifetime studying exceptional people and has just encountered the specific brand of exceptional that has no reference point in the archive. "Good night, Harry," he said. "Good night," Harry said. The door closed. Harry sat in the quiet of the hospital wing with the tin of sherbets on his bedside table and the evening sounds of the castle around him, and the fire in his chest burning its steady, permanent, entirely unconcerned burn. He reached out and took a sherbet, let it dissolve on his tongue, looked at the window, where the sky outside was the deep blue of a Scottish summer evening, the last light still showing above the mountains with no intention of going anywhere. He'd defeated Voldemort at 11 years old on 17 hours of sleep, in a school he'd been at for 9 months. He'd done it with a fire someone had trusted him with, and 2 friends who were extraordinary in their own ways, and the instincts of a dead man who had looked across whatever distance separated worlds and decided that Harry Potter was what came next. He hadn't hidden from any of it. He hadn't been afraid of any of it. He thought about Ron's face on the chessboard, Hermione's quick, fierce hug, the way Neville's magic bloomed in a greenhouse, the way McGonagall's door was open. The way Snape had said be careful, like he couldn't stop himself from meaning it. He thought about the mirror, his reflection, hands open, light pouring outward. He thought about what came next, the summer, and the second year, and whatever Voldemort was rebuilding in the spaces Harry couldn't see yet, and the long road of becoming fully whatever he was becoming. He thought about the pieces of Voldemort hidden in the world like seeds waiting for the right season, and about the fact that he was the only person alive who could feel the specific cold quality of that particular magic, which made him the best tool for finding it if he chose to be a tool, which he didn't, which meant he'd find it on his own terms. He finished the sherbet, put the tin on the table, lay back. Dumbledore had asked him, "What are you, Harry?" He hadn't said it tonight, not out loud, not in so many words. But the answer was the same one he'd had since the first night in the common room, sitting on the hearthrug with the light gathered in his palm. It was the same answer the Hat had heard when he'd argued for Gryffindor. The same one the mirror had shown him, reflected back in gold. He was Harry Potter. He was the Sorcerer Supreme's heir. He was the son of James and Lily, shaped by their sacrifice, freed by what they'd left behind. He was a boy who'd spent 10 years being told to be small, and had finally stopped listening. He was what Strange had spent however long looking for across whatever distances separated one world from another. He was what came after the ending that was supposed to be an ending. He closed his eyes. The fire in his chest burned quiet and steady and enormous. Outside, the summer evening over Scotland held its light as long as it possibly could, and the mountains sat in their eternal, unhurried way, and Hogwarts breathed around its newest extraordinary thing and made room.